All right, then we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Florida Cattlemen's Institute and Allied Trade Show. I'm Lauren Butler. I'm the chair of the committee this year, and we're so excited to see you today. Of course, we're disappointed that we can't do this in person. If you have attended the trade show before, you know that it's a live event with actual trade show, and we have speakers throughout and a lunch, and we always enjoy all the networking that takes place. Certainly. And so with this year and the pandemic that's caused such an issue, our committee, which is made up of some allied representatives and some UF livestock and ag agents, we really tried to focus on what could have affected you during the pandemic this year. And so, anything that could have trickled into your operation, we tried to come up with topics and presentations that could help you troubleshoot some issues or kind of, relieve some of those problems. So we're excited. We hope that we found some relevant topics. All of our presenters today are UF specialists, so that's always a pleasure to listen to them. And so as we go through the presentations, just a quick housekeeping. We'd like for you to, if you have a question, please ask it. We'd love to hear from you, but we are asking that you put it in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your toolbar. And it will show everybody's questions so that we will know if there's, that way if somebody asks a question, you don't have to ask it again if it's already been asked. So that's going to be available to you. If the presenters have left enough time at the end of their presentations, we can address some questions. If not, you could even message them personally yourself. So as in the past, we've had a lot of allied industry support for this program. And so we would like to just say a big thank you to those trade show vendors that have helped us in the past. And we actually have some sponsors this year that we wanted to recognize. And so real quick, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Creel Tractor, Quality Liquid Feed, SVN, Saunders, Ralston, Dantzler Real Estate, Zoetis, Beckert, Bayer, Florida Agriculture Crimes Intelligence Unit, Multimin, Boehringer Ingelheim, Beefmaster Breeders United, AbVista, and Merck. So with that, we'd really like to go ahead and get started. Our first speaker, as always, is the Florida Cattlemen's Association president. And this year we are lucky to have Mr. Gene Lollis. And so we're going to let Gene make his comments about anything we need to know with the Cattlemen's Association. Gene?
What a great privilege for me today to be able to kick off this 38th annual Florida Cattlemen's Institute. That's a great honor for me to do this. I'm going to start off today, probably something a little unordinary, but a request. Recently, in the last few weeks, few months, we've lost quite a few people that had a lot of impact to our industry in this last year as well. And if y'all don't mind, I'll just like to maybe take 30 seconds just to kind of reflect on all those, that we may have lost this recently in this past year, in the last few weeks as well. And then if you don't mind, if you will indulge me, I'll say a little prayer. And if it's not appropriate, I'm sorry. I'm going to make it appropriate today. Okay, well, dear Heavenly Father, we just come to you today to praise you and thank you for all the many blessings. Lord, we don't always understand the things that happen to our lives and the things that some that they go through before they're lost. Lord, we just ask that you be with their families, be with their friends, and be with all, Lord, as we go through these uncertain times or changing times, Lord. But we know that you're always there for us. We know that one day we'll be back with them as we ride together on those great open plains for eternity. We thank you for the abilities. I thank you for the doctors and the people that help bring those new things to our livelihoods. We thank you for our relationships and all these things we ask in your name. Amen. Thank y'all for allowing me to do that. A lot of these folks are a lot of special friends of mine, And as you all may know, some of them, I did not want to mention names because there's so many that I may have forgotten. And but we're all thinking of them, and we're on a daily basis here. So again, it's an honor for me to serve a boy like me, to serve as a president of a great association, and be able to be involved with the University of IFAS. I did graduate from there. Sometimes I didn't think I was going to be able to, but I did. As I started my presidency, I had a lot of folks ask, said, "What are you going to do different, Gene, in your presidency?" I said, "We're not going to do anything different." Past President Matt Pierce set us on a row to hoe, and we're going to hoe that row until we'll probably never get to the end of it, because it is about engaging and educating the decision makers and those of the general public that affect our livelihoods on a daily basis in agriculture and ranching. So, as you're all aware, each year the Cattlemen the president gets to throw a theme out. And that theme for this year is hashtag Open Gates, Open Minds. I think that's kind of the essence of this Cattlemen's Institute, is opening gates, opening minds. All the presenters that you'll hear here today will help us in our daily lives by opening our minds. So please, pay attention to what they have to say, because what they're going to convey to you will help us. And and I also believe that by engaging our producers, I want to talk about long-term relationships. I mean, the Cattlemen's have a long-term relationship with the University of Florida and IFAS, and I think it's more important today than it ever has been that we work together and convey messages. And that message is how important agriculture is to our state of Florida. It's not only economically, but what its effects and value to our waters, our lands, our wildlife, and the true meaning to our society, that our ability to feed ourselves and our national security. I took and reflected the other day as I was talking to some folks, in the 5-month period that we're able to grow crops here in Florida, that it affects or has a potential impact to about 180 million people from the crops and things that we grow here in Florida. My numbers may be off a little bit, but our agricultural system in the state of Florida is very vital to the rest of the United States, and not only to the 22.5, probably 25 million now, who knows. Every time I drive up the Turnpike 75, it looks like it might be 30 million. But this year we're going to commemorate 500 years of cattle in Florida. I've said it to multiple times, is I thank God for the prevailing winds, the Spaniards for bringing cattle to this peninsula that so long ago. That kind of leads me, to our industry. What other industry can say they've had cattle in their state for 500 years? There's not one. We ought to all be standing on a rooftop singing that and telling that story and telling about the vivid history of the cattle industry in the state of Florida. And not only the cattle industry, I always promote agriculture. And that goes back to that relationship with all that's involved in this institute. And again, that kind of leads me into, as we move into February and March, our legislative days that Tallahassee, we're not going to be able to meet just due to the COVID restrictions. So as you'll see in our next magazine, in my deal, I'm going to ask that we have a call for commitment and outreach. And what we're asking for is you to reach out to your county, your state, your federal level elected officials, your appointed officials, those that impact our lives by the decisions they make sitting somewhere else. It is more important today for us to engage them. The FCA will come out with our priority list. But that's our relationship again with the University of Florida, is we got to convey that message, and we got to convey it more today than it's, again, our priorities are, of course, always no new taxes, no land use restrictions, no regulation, no regulations that may burden us. And we're always seeking funding, for the Cattlemen Management Board that we lost last year, conservation programs such as the Rural and Family Lands, funding for the Division of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And of course, as always, our friends, University of Florida IFAS, we always back everything they do, because what the findings they do through the research and things they do impact what we do on a day-to-day basis. I'm gonna reflect again back on that long-term relationship. I think that's a huge part of our story, that we work together to advance our agricultural systems. And I think that today is what some folks don't understand, the complexity of our agricultural systems to produce the food that they eat. And that's the relationship that we work together to be able to convey that message. There's no doubt these relationships have been beneficial for us all. The knowledge and the science that we build is essential and the biggest part of our story today, whether some people want to believe the science or not. That's the message that we got to continue to convey to the general public. It's just like I always say to a lot of interns that come here, and I say it to everybody, I say it to a lot of my friends, is every day we got to keep getting up, we got to keep showing up, we got to keep participating. And the most important thing, and no matter what you do in this life, is never give up. Is achieve for the stars, and maybe you'll hit the moon. So that's kind of my long speech, but things that we got to keep our mind on here is BMPs and traceability. BMPs are here. They're no longer a voluntary program. It's a choice. You have a choice between BMPs, or you will have to go through the Florida Department of Environmental Protections and do a water monitoring program on your lands. Now, I've caught a lot of heat on BMPs and say, what are you doing? Well, BMPs are not new. We've been doing them for 23 years. We're just now, in those 23 years, what has happened to our state? Our population has increased by about 9.5 million people. So that's about half of our population in about a 22-year period. So I lost my screen. So it's more and more important to convey that message on a day-to-day basis. Traceability, I got a long list there, but I'm not going to get into it. It's going to be a little bit of time. We've got a new administration going in, so the USDA's got a lot of things to figure out. So it'll probably be another 4 or 5 years, but we're continuing our pilot project. There's a lot of cattle moving out of the state, going through the system, because as like BMPs, we're always wanting to be engaged, so we're at the table instead of on the table. Other points that I want to bring up that I think that we'll see in the next year and the next 4 years for sure. Your NCBA president, which will be soon your immediate past president of NCBA, brought up at our last quarterly meeting words that we do not like to sometimes hear, but are here to stay. And those words are sustainability, carbon, methane, environmental impacts. All of those things, they're the words that are going to be here, and we might as well get ready to embrace them. That's part of that relationship with the University of IFAS, because I know they're working on all those things. That's about my message. I hope I wish we could have all been there in person. And I hope, in closing, I always like to give the floor to the audience. And I call it kind of the moan, groans, and gripes. And as I've gone around the state a little bit, I've had some members and things saying, well, we're not being heard. Well, I can promise you you're being heard, but sometimes you might not like the answer that you receive. But that does not mean that you cannot bring your issues, your concerns, or your thoughts back to the next meeting, or contact any of your volunteer leaders in this organization. With that, I'll just ask for any questions. Did I overrun, or am I good? Dang, I'm good. So I thank you. It's a great opportunity. I appreciate it. And we're going to keep working to promote agriculture and cattle ranching in this state for another 500 years. So if any questions, I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
All right. Thank you, Gene. I really appreciate your messaging today, and I certainly appreciate our prayer this morning or this afternoon, as it was our family that was also affected by some loss this week. And actually, I just got here from a funeral myself, and then I guess Dr. Scott Engel also had a funeral this morning. So yeah, it's just in the air. Let me just check the chat. There is a message from Dr. Mukhtar if you would like to read in the chat box. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Jeanna Mastrodicasa. She is taking the place of Dr. Engel today, but she asked me to read his bio anyhow because I don't have a bio for her. So bear with me if I want to read, because a lot of us have not met Dr. Engel yet. I personally have. He's popped into Okeechobee and visited me, so I've had the pleasure of meeting him. But I want to introduce him. He is the University of Florida's new Vice President for Agriculture and Natural Resources, basically the leader of IFAS. He provides management and strategic leadership for the UF College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, the Florida Cooperative Extension Service, the Florida Ag Experiment Stations, the School of Forest Resources and Conservation, and the School of Natural Resources and Environment. He earned his BS and MS at the University of Maryland in Agronomy and Soil Science. He earned his PhD from the University of Missouri with an emphasis on soil microbiology. His former careers include Director of NIFA, and Associate Director of the Maryland Agriculture Experiment Station and Maryland Cooperative Extension. And he also served as the President and CEO of the International Fertilizer Development Center. His accomplished career in government, nonprofit, international development, and academia strives for an approach to leadership based on service, partnership, and drive for impact. So with that, I'm going to let Dr. Mastrodicasa give us his message. Thank you for being with us today.
I sure will. And thank you so much for the invitation. I want to give full recognition that this was one of the earliest requests for a speaking engagement for Dr. Engel that right after he began in July. And we've had it on the calendar, and unfortunately he had to go to a family funeral, which is, as we all know, is sometimes comes out of the blue. So he does send his regards and his regrets. And he asked me to carry some of the message forward. And I just want to say thank you so much, Mr. Lollis, for all you had to say today. The Florida Cattlemen's Association has just been an incredible partner throughout all the time. And I am sad to not be able to join you in Tallahassee for the Boots on the Hill event this year. I actually just had a Facebook reminder that I was at this within a few years ago, this exact day. So, and it's one of my favorite things to get to do. So what I just wanted to tell all of you is that Dr. Engel has begun this job and is off and running. And in fact, today was supposed to be his visiting each and every off-campus research and education center. I'm actually right now in Lake Alfred, although the photo behind me is in Ona at the Range Cattle Research and Education Center. So he is visiting. He's spending a lot of time with stakeholders. He is very insistent that he is going to visit all of our extension offices. I think he thinks in the first year. He's trying very hard to do it. So if you happen to work in an extension office, you will be getting a chance to meet him or one of our research and education centers. He is very interested to hear what not only our own faculty and staff have to say, but more importantly, our stakeholders have to say. And he's been spending a lot of time visiting farms, ranches, doing all kinds of things he can. I know he's been down to Highlands County and visited a bunch of ranches. I know that He has just really gone out of his way to accept as many invitations as he gets. So I will say to you, if you were thinking about inviting him, let me know, and I can help him get to come see you in person, get some FaceTime. I think he has also had the opportunity to come and speak at the Florida Cattlemen's Quarterly in the fall, the early fall. So he's been getting around. We did a unit review of our Range Cattle Research and Education Center, and so he got to meet many of you there as well. So he is very interested in your input. You can reach out to him. He will respond. His email is jangle, JANGLE @ufl.edu. So please don't be shy about that. He's really very interested in hearing what you all have to say and what do we need to be doing for you as our constituents. So please take that opportunity. I was going to update you on two small things. One is we, as always, have some searches going on. We have Dean Elaine Turner is leading our search for our Dean for Extension. As you know, Dr. Place went to another institution north of here that wears red and black, and we are looking to replace him. We have doing some screening interviews, and there'll be an opportunity for you two to meet our final candidates, and we'll be interested in that. We're hiring some different livestock positions and other things around the state. If your county is in need of this, just keep asking, and as soon as we get the okay from the Central University, we will do our best to hire. I think that's really important. And the other thing I would say is, just so to let everybody know, I think it's in this month's Florida Cattlemen and Livestock Journal, and my magazine arrived recently, and I got to read all about the DeLuca Preserve. We were gifted 27,000 acres near Yeehaw Junction. And I will tell you personally, I didn't know how big 27,000 acres was till I saw it on the map and went, oh my, that is very, very large. And it includes cattle ranch land, citrus groves, wetlands, forests, and it's going to remain in conservation and education purpose. The cattle ranching will continue. There'll be opportunities to conduct research, and we are going to have some other opportunities for advisory committees. So if you are interested in anything about the DeLuca Preserve, please feel free to reach out and give us your thoughts on it. We certainly don't get a donation like that every day. More importantly, we're interested in preserving the land and keeping everything as pristine as possible. And this really goes back to what I think is the key message here from not only the Cattlemen's Association, but also with IFAS. We are doing our best to provide each and every one of you the best information, the latest research, how to apply these things, how to take our knowledge out to you. We're working extremely closely on the BMP issue. Dr. Engel is determined to dedicate additional resources just specifically to update any recommendations that may have gotten a bit outdated or some other ways to improve that. So I just want to let you all know that this is something he hears all across the state in a variety of industries, and we are right in the middle of all of it. You heard that he's a soil and water scientist. For the holidays, I gave him a book about water in Florida, so hopefully he has read it and has learned a whole lot. And so I just want to say thank you on his behalf. Thank you for all you do. Thank you to all the presenters today. It's wonderful to see a number of colleagues from around IFAS and different areas and different locations, because I don't always get to see all of you. And I have to say, I miss everybody. I miss seeing many of you in person. And I look forward to the next time I get to see you. I like seeing you on Zoom, but I'd really like to see you in person. So feel free to reach out to me or to Dr. Engel directly with any concerns. My email is jmastro@ufl.edu. I'm the only Mastrodicasa there. So I hear if you call the university operator and say, I'm looking for this person, they find me. So there you go. It's the joy of having an unusual name. So enjoy the rest of your day. The schedule looks wonderful. And I am very proud to know that you're going to get some excellent information today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming and pinch hitting for Dr. Engel. We really appreciate your comments. So thank you for being here with us today. So at this time, we're going to dive into our program. And again, if you have any questions, just please put them in the Q&A box down below, and we will try to get to them and have our panelists note them and answer your questions. So our first presenter is Chris Prevatt. Chris is a state specialized agent for beef cattle and forage enterprise. Budget and marketing. His program focuses on the economics of livestock and forages, the management practices and marketing strategies for cattle producers. His goal is to educate extension faculty and the clientele on the management practices that increase the profitability of livestock and forage producers. He will be presenting on how to be a high return producer in a down market. Chris?
Thank you. I appreciate y'all having me today. Gonna talk a little bit about maximizing our net returns and following kind of the cycle and kind of where we are in the market right now. Okay, so whenever I'm thinking about, how am I going to become a high return producer in a down market? Overall, I'm really thinking, what's going to be our objective? So is our objective short term or long term? What does it need to be? And then how do we develop a strategy to surround our business so we can develop the cash flow to potentially have those returns whenever we might not be in the best marketing situation, like we've been, kind of post 2016. We've been in this area where, we're not anywhere near those levels where we saw in the first half of the 2010 decade. So that's kind of my thinkings whenever I got this title. If we need to really generate some returns at any given time, there's always the possibility for us to make some liquidations, generate that cash flow in order to service debt. That's another consideration that came into my mind. Lastly, there's always that potential where we need to be thinking about how to develop new revenue streams. We got to continue to innovate our farms and ranches. So developing those new revenue streams can be absolutely critical whenever we are having that down market. So I'll talk a little bit about it from a couple different standpoints here. So my objective is obviously just to focus on the high return aspect. I look at it as, hey, it's a business. Let's evaluate it like it is one. It's not all about just 1 year. So it's not all about 2020 unless we absolutely had to have those high cash flow levels. Unless we absolutely had to have that cash flow in 2020, it's really about having that high long-term average for us. So that's going to be absolutely critical for us. And then in a down market, we also must maintain cash flow. So given some of the different things that we're going to be looking at and evaluating, we always have to maintain those cash flows, whether that be marketing our feeder calves or marketing some cull cows as well. Okay, so what separates us? I've got three things that really separate us whenever we're talking about high return. The first thing is understanding the U.S. cattle price cycle. That's absolutely key. The price cycle has been happening for over 150 years now. It's very critical that we understand it, we use it, and it's a management tool for us as we start thinking about preparing for the next 5 to 10 years, or if we're thinking about 2020 and the decisions we make today. So briefly, just, discussing the cattle price cycle that we're in today. We followed this cycle. We really got into the cycle, studying it back in 2015. Obviously, as those feeder calf prices reached their highs in 2014, 2015, that was due to the lack of supply in U.S. cattle inventory. So that's absolutely critical for us to know and understand whenever we have those high levels of inventory like we had in the mid 90s led to those low cattle prices, and then the low levels of inventory obviously led to the higher cattle prices. So moving into, again, we follow the same relationship here with our cow-calf returns and our U.S. cattle inventory. So just following that relationship along, you know, it allows us to anticipate as we move forward, you know, what those projections are going to be for the next 5-10 years. And I use this to help. This is going to provide us with some information from 2015. So we weren't in such a critical, you know, cost of production and revenue structure here in 2020 is if we'd been following this cycle for the past 5 years and making decisions based on that cycle. So just getting into the cycle. So obviously the projected cattle prices and profits during the 4 phases of the cattle cycle. This is what we're looking at in terms of economics, and then adjusting our operation based off of these different phases. So obviously, you know, these are just projections. You know, there's been good times. There's been really good runs in the cattle market since 2015, but there's also been some significant lows back in October 2016 and obviously April and May 2020. So obviously the cattle price cycle occurs based on U.S. cattle herd expansion. Supply has a big, has a overwhelming factor there in determining U.S. cattle prices. So increases in that beef production causes that transition to cyclically lower cattle prices for us, as well as herd expansion continues until those prices approach most producers' costs of production. And that's what we've seen in 2019 and 2020. That's kind of, we've started moving to a reduction phase of the U.S. cattle cycle. So we know, you know, typically in terms of cattle cycles, they last between 9 to 11 years. So if you think about it, beginning back there, 2014, 2015, we know that this cycle's probably going to last out there till 2025. So the next few years, you're going to have a significant decline in inventories, kind of what the projections look like. And that's going to lead to higher prices out there, 22, 23, 24, 25. So investments in 2020, you know, as we calculate what USDA or FAPRI, what their projections are, using this cycle allows us to maximize those high returns, even in down years in the cattle market. So here's those 4 phases. This is typically based on the last 150 years. This is kind of what we would expect. Obviously, there were significant prices. This is just based on an average cow-calf operation. Significant profits, 2013 through 2015. We were in the downward price transition for most of 2015 through 2019. There was ups and downs. Significant losses 2019 through 2021. We'll see how, you know, things play out. There was some tough times there in April and May of 2020. Then we're kind of moving into this upward price transition. So from those lows, moving into improved profitability. So we're using the cycle in order to, you know, potentially place those investments in 2021 through 2027 out there in times where profitability is improving for us. So this is kind of, you know, really what it's looked like from July 2015. You know, we had a significant down market. We've had some seasonal cyclical increases and decreases in price. And, you know, from these lows, we're hoping we hit that next time period where, you know, this lack of supply is also, you know, in just adequate demand, just normal demand. We don't have to have significantly increasing demand. We have 110,000 less restaurants in the United States today than what we did a year ago. So, you know, if we can just maintain beef consumption where it is right now without those restaurants, I think it's absolutely critical and important for us. So again, that was July 2015 to that low in October 2016. We've had these moves, and then you get into this upward, you know, this upward movement now in terms of cattle prices that we hope to see as we move a little bit further through this pandemic. Really, it's been like an up 5 years, down 5 years, and then we're starting the next 5-year cycle for us. That's a really easy way for us to think about where we are in terms of U.S. cattle prices in the market for us. In terms of just annual average cattle prices, a couple things to think about here is that, just in terms of long-term averages here, the price is just steadily increasing based on nominal dollars. You're going to see an increase in terms of the value of cattle prices. This looks at Southern Plains cattle prices. And as you can see here, LMIC projects that there was a 2020 low there in terms of annual cattle prices over the last almost decade there, nine plus years there, all the way back to 2010 when we had to see a lower average. And then as you move into the next decade, that's kind of why we're thinking about using this cattle cycle to potentially increase those revenues. So, what are we talking about here in terms of being a high return producer? We're developing a strategy. We're developing objectives. We're developing a strategy. How can we use this strategy in order to develop those high returns? So first, I mentioned about, potential debt payments, maintaining cash flows. So that's always number one, survive, making sure we're financially stable. It's absolutely critical whenever we're thinking about our cattle operation. And then number two, just analyzing that investment potential for herd expansion. And as we use long-term projections from USDA and the Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute, that's going to show us kind of where we need to go with our herd. And again, this is going to be at a time period where, if you're investing in the future, investing into those high returns, having that high level of management, it requires having the cash flow to maintain your operation through these time periods when prices aren't optimal for us. But as we move into 2022 and further out there, that's where we're expecting that price to pick up significantly for us. So I'll just share with you an analysis that we did a couple years ago, looking at that most valuable female owned during the last beef price cycle. She was born in 2006, developed in 2007, had her first calf in 2008, 6 more calves from 2009 to 2014, then culled in 2014. That culled cattle income, again, contributing 25% of her entire net profitability that she was going to provide for. So looking at that, thinking about that investment strategy over a decade rather than a single year, that cow was produced, that calf, she started her productive life back here in 2006, 2008. She was having calves on the way up there from 2008 to all the way to 2014. So she was developing these calves, maximizing that potential revenue that was available for us there. Now, if we look at our least valuable heifer, it's going to be the one that was born in 2014, kept over, developed in 2015, and then it's going to have calves from 2016 through 2022, then culled in 2022. That's going to be our least valuable female owned. And obviously, again, if we follow the cycle there, 2014, 2015, we're just never going to catch up that opportunity cost, which is real because, we didn't cash in and receive those revenue. So the calf that we saved there for these lower returns in terms of just less net revenue really hurts us here in terms of looking at the potential for that animal. Just in terms of another strategy, we're looking at being a high return producer in 2020. When you get to the bottom of a cycle, there's not, the potential risk when you get to the bottom of the cycle. As long as you've got cash flow, you can maintain your payments. The risk to take it out for longer time periods, to add additional weight, is significantly lower than in other time periods. So that's also a strategy that has been used for many years in the cattle industry. and potentially, we always talk about that seasonal in the third and fourth quarter of the year. Well, whenever you're at the bottom of the cattle price cycle, that seasonal, taking those animals out to higher weights from 550 to 750 pound calves, again, that adds an additional operation, maybe some preconditioning or some stockering, maybe not done here in Florida. You always have that opportunity, but evaluating different options there, it's always a potential opportunity for us. Another thing that separates us. So whenever we look at economic studies that evaluate, profitable operations, every year, Kansas State University has a group that evaluates the tax returns of agricultural operations, and ranches is one of them that they look at. They look at what the characteristics of profitable ranches are. And each year, they continue to find very similar characteristics than from what we know historically, that there's tremendous differences between ranches. No two ranches are the same, even if we have, very similar calving seasons, cost of productions, investments. We make these decisions. We have different strategies. We're not the same, but there's several characteristics of these ranches that can be similar. So, we've always talked about, that not one key factor is going to be managed directly and purely that's going to consistently lead to profitability in the cow-calf business. The key thing we always talk about is weaning weights, or I mentioned that it doesn't, we can't solely focus on reproduction. It's going to be, whatever we can reasonably get these levels of production and performance for us. So what are those characteristics? Some of those characteristics for high levels of profit that we typically evaluate are definitely going to be low levels of investment. So, we're not over invested in machinery and equipment, or we bought land at a substantially higher price than, what that potential value is for agricultural operations. We may have to separate it in a lot of areas of Florida and say, hey, we purchased this land not necessarily for the cattle operation, but for appreciation of land in terms of the urbanization of Florida potentially. Average levels of production consistently, if we look at the K-State data, it's in the 80s in terms of reproduction is typically where those characteristics of profitable ranches, that's where those high levels of profit are generally found. A lot of times we spend too much money trying to get that next unit of production once we get into the medium to high 80s. Low levels of production costs, we're hitting key there in terms of management of our cost of production, and then above average marketing. For me, that's developing a plan, implementing that plan based on, knowing what these buyers want, being able to produce it at a low cost. Hey, that's what our successful businesses in the United States are built around. The last thing I'd like to get in today is, knowing your numbers, knowing what you need to be managing, and, what you need to be looking at financially in terms of generating high returns. And I'm going to focus on costs of production for us today. So knowing your numbers is kind of my key. We always talk about herd records, and I think the key saying is herd records are useless unless you use them, but I can promise you it's the exact same for financial records. Financial records just can't be, something that we put together every April and we don't think about it. I know cow-calf production can be very complicated, and, we don't want to just know stuff just to know it in general. We want to be able to use this information in order to make decisions and improvements to our operation. So my focus here is just on knowing your costs. Well, this is whether you use a budget. We have a Florida ranch analysis that we did back in 2015 and 2018, and then also something like Quicken or QuickBooks in order to evaluate kind of where cash is really flowing. So in terms of estimating your average cow-calf cost, this is just LMIC data, just to show you at long-term average cow-calf costs here, total cash costs here. I think this is significantly higher than what we are in Florida. we're focused on developing a feeder calf that has minimal to average levels of CASA production for what we do here in Florida. So just get into some of the things that I kind of get to looking at. And so these are just kind of our cow-calf ranch analysis numbers that we did for 4 ranches, and just looking at what their basic expenses were and just kind of categorizing it in order to really help us make some decisions here. So this was a ranch expense analysis, just trying to break out expenses in terms of knowing where our greatest expenses were for these 4 ranches. Looking at on obviously feed, depreciation, interest. We charged them interest on all their variable and fixed costs, and then fertilizer and lime were significant expenses for us. But knowing those key areas there, that's going to be areas that we focus on and look at ways that we can potentially reduce those really big key areas first. Also, I like to break it out in terms of dollars per beef cow. Those same cost levels in terms of dollars per beef cow, I like to look at it in terms of dollars per day. It really, it obviously this is going to depend on the herd size as a whole, but not just looking at it for that, maybe you had to provide some supplementation for a 100-day feeding system. This looked at it overall in terms of what those potential costs were per day for 160 days, and then dollars per beef cow per day. So those are the key areas that I'm really thinking about as we try to start managing cost of production, is focusing on, those expenses, and then look at potential ways that we can reduce them. Obviously, one of the key areas here is focus on those large areas first, and then really begin to hit home and take steps to make those reductions. So where do I start? Looking at your operation, it's your operation. You own it. You're the manager of the operation. You're going to make the rules. My focus is usually try to make it less complicated as possible. Start on the easy things and really move into some of the more complicated ways later. Taking those easy steps first, it can really get things going for you. Success is obviously not going to happen by accident. So the way I go about, looking at developing this high returns is developing a plan, writing it down, making adjustments as we go, evaluating it, whether we're evaluating where we are in the herd cycle, evaluating, potentially where we are in terms of levels of investment, make those changes and adjustments, and then evaluating it each year, every 5 years, every 10 years. And the best way for us to look at it typically over those long-term time periods is looking at it through, a service like Quicken or QuickBooks, or I think there's some newer ones that are out there as well to potentially evaluate. As we're looking to make changes, I think we always have to approach things with an open mind, being willing to learn, define our success. What is high return for us? Setting goals that are reasonable and attainable. I'm always preaching budget for the year, budget for, 2021 now, potentially budgeting out there for 2022, knowing where we kind of are expecting our net revenue there in order to determine, what kind of we can in order to make our payments, our debts, servicing some debt, as well as what kind of cash flows and profitability there might be. And then in terms of just measuring these costs, measuring that success over time is absolutely critical for us. Identifying what needs to change. So I mentioned picking 1 or 2 areas to focus on this year. It's really easy to knock out a lot of those easy projects. Where that progress can be made is absolutely key. For me, it's going to be setting some goals where we really want to be in terms of management. For me, it's definitely having a written plan, really helping us to get there. So who's going to help us get to those high returns? I just throw this in there in terms of having a team approach to management. Our great teams work together And we do have a great team of extension agents and specialists around the state of Florida that are dedicated to working with Florida ranchers and forage growers as well. So not just family, but friends as well, bringing in other successful ranchers with the Florida Cattlemen's Association has always been so helpful, as Gene Lollis participated with us today. That veterinarian, I can't stress enough, having that relationship with our banker and lender is so critical to developing those high returns in this current cycle that we're in. And then in terms of financial records, bringing in an accountant to really look at how we can make improvements. And then the industry as well, knowing what's available to us and they're willing to work with us. Lastly, I'll just close with one quote that I really like was, the only truly sustainable competitive advantage is the ability to learn and adapt faster than your competition. It kind of goes back to thinking about being a high return producer. That quote definitely means that it's about learning, continuously learning, and it's not necessarily just about adopting whatever we're talking about today. It's about adapting it to whatever's going to fit your operation, your level of management, adapting it, and then implementing it. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Lauren, and I really appreciate y'all's time. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to try to help you out with those. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was a really great update on the market, and I especially enjoyed the last part where you're talking about using your resources to put some pieces together. That's a big part of it, and we're always here to help with educational stuff. But I'm not good at economics, so you're gonna have to call Chris if you're from Okeechobee. So with that, we're gonna introduce our next speaker, Dr. Vendramini. So he is a professor of agronomy and forage specialist. His research program is dedicated to forage management with an emphasis on subtropical production systems. The major area of his interest is forage livestock interface and the impact of forage management on forage and animal production and environmental quality. Dr. Vendramini also has an extension focus, which the main objective is to disseminate science-based information and to provide educational activities and extension publications to stakeholders, educators, and producers. His topic today is recovering the foundation of your operation in pasture management.
Thank you, Lauren. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I would like to thank for the opportunity and the invitation to come and present some of my data here and my thoughts about pasture management. This meeting has been a special meeting for me for a long time. So when I came to Florida in 2005 to start my job at ONA, it was the first meeting that I was invited to participate. It was still in Kissimmee. So it has been always a great opportunity to interact with producers and talk about some of the pressing issues that we have in beef cattle production. So those are the few topics that we're gonna try to cover today. So it will not be a marathon, but it will be like a 100-mile dash, 100 meters dash, really fast. And I'll try to cover a few topics that I think are quite important for the title that we talk about it. So when our pastures start decreasing the productivity, what may be the main factors that are collaborating with those, and how can we manage and try to avoid that situation. And the first thing that I would like to talk about is some philosophical problems that we have, and it's what are the potential reasons why our pastures are declining. And so when I ask the audience, and I think we are unfortunate that we cannot be together today and have the presentation not on Zoom, but with the audience there. But I use the same approach, and I ask people if they like this picture here, and everybody doesn't quite understand the question, and they are looking at this and say, yeah, that's regular, it's normal. But then I ask, how about now? if they like the picture, and yeah, everybody loves the picture, right? And a lot of people start raising questions about, what are the breeds? What are those heifers? Are they bred? And my point here is we have a lot of problems managing forages because we don't like it. That's the main thing. We like cattle, we like livestock, and we don't like the pasture. And if eventually somebody proves to us that it will be cheaper to feed our livestock just buying feed at the feed store, we'll do that. And we don't have the hassle to be managing foraging, planting, weed control, fertilization, and all the other things that come with. So the main philosophical principle that we struggle a lot with our pastors is because we don't like it. We like livestock. And many times we ended up that we don't care. So we get caught up in that situation. We unfortunately, bad news is I think we still need to do that because it's the most economic efficient way to feed a ruminant animal. So forage is still the most, probably the one that will have the least cost if you want to feed a ruminant. Here in Florida is quite important because we can probably graze year long. So offsetting the cost of our beef cattle production. So, and that's why we do it. And for that reason, we probably need to follow some basic principles in order to keep that pasture going and productivity being reasonable for us to keep the performance. So other partially controlled management factors, that those are the ones that we'll talk today, why the pastures are declining. And those are the ones that we'll talk today. There will be forage species selection, fertilization, and grazing management. I will not go deep in each topic because it may be one single presentation for each one, but I'll mention a few things that probably are important for us to learn. And we also have some management factors that we can control, such as in 2017, a few years ago, we have another hurricane here in South Florida. Everything was underwater, and we have several areas with pastures that die because it was like for a month underwater in places where it doesn't supposed to be that wet. And pests and diseases that in theory our forage is supposed to be tolerant, and then you have those surprises, right? Like the chinch bugs that we have a wave that was related to some weather conditions as well, but about 3 years ago we have a lot of places that have problems with chinch bugs, and we lost some pasture. So that are all this and social and personal reasons. So we just have pandemic times right now that probably limited the ability of a lot of people to move and go. If you have a place that you lease and you need to visit very frequently, and so all those things will play, and that may cause your pasture to decline, right? But those are the ones that we can't control. So, but we need to acknowledge those. And this has been the scenario that we have been facing on this pasture decline for a little while. So you start with a Bermuda grass. Let's say you have a jigs or TIF-95 Bermuda grass field. And then in a few years, you notice that we start having more common Bermuda and Bahia grass on it. And then it becomes this smudge grass. And when the smudge grass start going, and I'm not picking on smudge grass, I'm just saying that one probably of the worst weeds that we have, it just become more smudge grass, right? You keep doing what you are doing and you are going that direction and pretty much become more smudge grass. And then you have to reach that point that you need to renovate your pasture. And those things happen many times because there is an association with your pH decreasing over time, the way that you are grazing, the way that you are fertilizing your pastures. So under those control conditions, that has been the scenario that we see very often in the beef cattle industry. So those will be the topics that we will try to raise. And just to clarify here, because for the last 10 years, there was a rumor that there was some pasture decline. And I have seen that actually in different states that I work at. People say that the forage is dying because of pasture decline. Pasture decline is not the reason for the decrease in the stand or for the forage to die. There is no such a thing like pasture decline is something that we don't know what it is that is causing our pastures to die. No, pasture decline is the result of a series of management factors that will cause the pasture to decline, right? So it's pretty much like in human health, right? Somebody may have heart problems. Somebody may have digestive problems, and that may aggravate over time, and lead the person to have really ill over time. And that's the same thing, I think. But I just wanted to clear that myth that my forage is dying is because of pasture decline. No, your pasture is declining because of some reasons that, again, we may control or not, but we can identify most of the times the reasons. So I will switch here to my first topic, that is the forage species selection. That I would think that because most of the forages that we grow, mainly in South Florida, but in the state of Florida, like 95% or more are perennial forages. What does that mean? That means that you plant a pasture and you expect that pasture to be there for a long time, sometimes for a lifetime, right? So with that expectation that the pasture will last for a long time, so it's quite important to make the decision about the species, because if you make the wrong decision, that pasture may die in 2, 3 years, 5 years, and then you may have something that you didn't choose or you didn't select to have. And one particular thing about South Florida is we have so many species and choices where many other places in the country you don't, right? You go to some places here in the Southeast that your choices may be tall fescue and alfalfa, right? You have two choices. But here we have several different species that we can select and pick, and I'll talk a little bit about the criteria to have the selection. So, and what happened is, as I was saying, people select the wrong tool for the job, and the outcome may be like our friend here from a little university up north, that he select the wrong tool to take his steer around. So, and that is exactly what happened when you select the wrong forage species. So his convertible car doesn't look very good, and that's what's going to happen to your pasture pretty soon if you select the wrong species. And my suggestion is, the first question that you have when you're going to select a pasture is, why not Bahia grass, right? Because Bahia grass is pretty much a standard that we have here, and we like Bahia grass because it can tolerate a lot of abuse. That's why. It's the most productive? No. Is the one with better nutritive value? No, it's not. It's sufficient to keep a productive cow-calf operation, and is very persistent. So we can tolerate some ups and downs in our management. But you may have reasons why you don't plant Bahia grass, right? And the reasons may be you have high pH, Bahia grass don't go well. It may be you have soils that are poorly drained, so you have to plant Hermatria because probably Bahia grass will not survive. Or you are planning also to harvest hay, haylage, and Bahia grass may not be the best, although you can harvest hay and haylage out of Bahia grass. Bahia grass may not be the best choice for those options. And there are many other options. One story that I like to share is, many years ago, I went to visit a producer in South Florida, nice guy, and we were taking a look at pasture, a Bahia grass pasture that had some problems, and the place seems to be very wet. So like, if you are familiar with South Florida, we have a lot of wet places here. If you go in the summer, you're gonna get your feet wet. And I was talking to the guy and said, probably we may have a different forage species that may be better in this kind of soil here because it's poorly drained. And so probably, your Bahia grass is not really well adapted. And the guy looked at me and said, Doc, I'm sorry, but I am a Bahia grass guy. So at that time, that was the first time that I was introduced to the term, I am a Bahia grass guy. But after a little while, I started understanding more what that means. So that pretty much means that you have an extensive forage system. You may have a very good forage system, but it's more extensive with less inputs. So in Bahia grass may be the forage that will fit your system the better. But as I said, every forage species will have the good and bad on it. But I think it's a very important decision to make when you start planning about the pasture that you're going to plant. What are the species or even cultivars, right, that will fit well here on my system? And that will be a very important decision. The second topic that I would like to talk about is the forage fertilization. Probably this will be a very comprehensive topic and long topic, because there are many factors, right, that can affect forage fertilization, and many things to talk about, even if you talk about the main nutrients, right, that we usually apply and manage on our pastures. And I'll have a more focus on some current problems that we have seen lately. But the first thing that I always take the opportunity to promote is the soil testing, right? It's like a blood test. So you cannot guess what is your soil fertility and your nutrient profile in your soil without testing. And that is like a $10, $12 test that will tell you everything that you need to know to make educated decisions. So this is the first thing. If you skip this step here, I think it'll be very difficult for you to make some good decisions further away regarding your fertilization. So, and also when we are with the audience, I ask the audience about, you go to a pasture, right? You go to a pasture to visit, we get phone calls, so we go there with many times my colleagues, the agents, and then you ask the producer, do you have a recent soil testing results from this pasture here? And the producer look at you and say, oh, I may have one from about 5 years ago. The guy from the fertilizer company took him, but I don't know where it is. So I probably will have. So when I get in that situation, do you know the first thing that pop on my mind? That is a Bahia grass guy. That is the Bahia grass guy, the guy that manage more extensively, right? And don't keep track of a few things, actually some few important things that he should actually. And then you get in that situation that you start having that decrease in production, or even the forage start dying. So let's keep in mind, so soil testing is probably the most important and the first one to do it. And the first thing that we see in that soil analysis is the pH, right? Because we have several important things, but the pH is probably the one that we should take a look first, because it's one that will be quite, the cost of adjusting the pH is not the highest, and also the benefit is tremendous, right? So we have this set of data here that was done here at ONA, and we have the fertilizer treatment where the person didn't apply anything, but then they apply nitrogen, P and K, or nitrogen, P and K, and micronutrients, right? And you see that when you add lime to the scenario for a soil that was 4.3 to start with, so if you even didn't apply any other fertilizer, you increase your production by 12% just with lime application. And when you apply nitrogen on top of the lime, increase your production by 25%. So it's the advantage of adjusting that pH to get close to the ideal for that specific forage species is probably the first step that we need to go. And some people think, well, Bahia grass likes more acidic. 5.5 is the target pH for Bahia grass. Does it like 4.5? No, it doesn't. In fact, hurts the production of Bahia grass. Dr. Sonnenberger had a trial that I was a collaborator, so he did the locations in Pasco and Sumter County, and I did 2 locations here down in Hardy County. And these are the nutrient profiles in the areas that we select, all Bahia grass pastures. that were being grazed by beef cattle. So you can see that the areas, most of them, other than the hardy 2, they have a low soil pH, right? And low levels of P and low levels of K. And what we saw is when we adjust the pH on those soils, what happened was we have an increase in production about 8% in 8 of 4 sites. And you can see how in 2007, we have a better response. It was mainly because with time, the lime react slowly when you apply lime on the surface. So I think we could harvest the benefit more in year 2 than actually year 1. But it shows a clear benefit of the liming in those extensive Bahia grass pastures. And another problem, that is the other extreme of the spectrum, is high pHs. This picture here was taken in Pasco County with the help of Ed Jennings. There was a multi-county agent there at that time. And those pastures, for some mismanagement, they ended up with high pH. And so the stand of Bahia grass just disappeared because it was not adapted to those conditions. So another scenario here showing the importance of forage testing to adjust that pH. And I will switch gears here to another topic that it has been quite important in the last 5 years because that is potassium fertilization. And the reason is we many times try to focus on nitrogen because nitrogen is directly related to production, and we forget the other nutrients that may be as important as nitrogen, right? In this trial here with Jigs Bermuda grass, we have levels of potassium application of 0, 40, and 80 pounds to the acre, right? This is Jigs Bermuda grass harvest, not grazing. And you can see the increase in production when we have the application of potassium. So if you particularly, if you have, it's important for all species, but particularly if you have Bermuda grass, you really need to pay attention to your potassium levels and make sure that you replace the potassium that has been extracted by the plant. When you harvest hay, is even more important because there is very few and little opportunity for recycling from the animals. So you need to replace that potassium. And I think that's the most important information based on that trial. Look what happened with the ground cover of jigs when we didn't apply potassium for 2 years and we apply nitrogen, right? So we decreased the ground cover from 86% when it was 80 pounds to the acre to 31%. And now I will show you the pictures. In May, we come to the fields to stage the grass and start the trial. This is the control treatment, the one that has 31% jigs cover. This is the 40 pounds to the acre. You can see a greater presence of jigs. And this is the 80 pounds. Same day, same time, side by side. So I think that is very illustrative of the importance of keep up with that potassium levels in these forages. And again, soil test will tell a lot of stories and also associate the potassium fertilization with the management that you are applying at the area at the time. We did some work. This is the work from J.K. Yarborough during his master's degree. And we also create another tool that it was the tissue test of potassium. And I want to be careful here to tell you what that means, because it told us that when you have tissue test about 1.4% in potassium, that means if you have below 1.4, your grass may have limited production due to low potassium concentration in the tissue. So every time that tissue was lower than 1.4 and we challenged the plant to grow, the plant was not able to grow at the point where the plants that have 1.4% potassium, they were growing actively and well. So I think the tissue test is another tool that we create over time, and we can probably check also with a simple test what is the concentration of potassium to see if you eventually need to make some decisions on potassium fertilization. And we just talk about the things that we see, right? That is the top growth. But if you look at down to the roots, looks what happens with different levels of potassium fertilization. So you decrease by a quarter the amount of roots that were in the treatments that didn't receive any potassium compared to the one that received 72 pounds to the acre. So the effects on the roots and the ability of the plant to remove nutrients is tremendous. And that's just some illustration of the difference between when you have no potassium and you have potassium on those plants. So now I will switch to the last topic that I'll cover today. That will be the grazing. That I think is a little more dynamic than the other two. And I will start with a little movie here, and I will tell you what's going on in those movies just to illustrate the difference in the herbage mass there in the behavior of the animal. What we did in this trial, we have a Bahia grass paddock that we mow every 2 weeks. So we keep it really short. And that has about 600 pounds of dry matter to the acre, really short during the growing season. So we kept our steers in the pen for 16 hours with fasting, no food. And then we turned them loose in the paddocks in the morning. So they were really hungry. Those steers are trained to graze, so they know what to do. They have done that many times. So we turned the steer in the really short pasture, and looks what happened. So after 16 hours in the pens, we turn the steer loose, and the steer don't even try to graze. And it's very difficult for an animal that just have the bottom teeth and trying to grab the forage with their tongue to get the forage that is that short. So then short forage, what happens is the animal needs to make a lot of effort to apprehend. And in this case, the animal didn't even try. Then we moved the steer to a paddock that was mowed every 4 weeks. And look at what happened. Automatically, the animal put his hand down and start grazing, right? And you can see there was a very active grazing. So he was not fooling around. He was really grazing because he was hungry from the night, right? This is a 4-week regrowth Bahia grass during July. And that is probably what we want to see in our pastures, right? We turn on our cows, and that's the kind of grazing and forage consumption that we expect. So, and just to clear any doubts and questions about the demonstration that we were doing, I will anticipate to you what's going to happen. So we decide to move the animal. Now the animal knows about the forage, let's say, and now we decide to move the animal back to our first paddock that was really short. After he grazed there for a while, so we decide, well, let's move it back and see if now he's more motivated to graze, what's gonna happen. So it was just move it right there. We move him, the other paddock that is good is right on the side where I'm at right now, and we move him to the short one. Look what happened. And he didn't even try to graze again. And the reason why is because it's very difficult for an animal to graze that short forage. So that's what we keep talking over time about, to keep the adequate herbage mass and the influence that will have on your animals, right? That is just an illustration of the exercise that we have. And now I'll give you another good example of the grazing, just to illustrate what I want to tell you. I talked to you in that video, we saw the importance to the animal, right? And now I'll tell you what happens to the plant. So we'll have this scenario one, we have a little Bahia grass plant there that we come and graze it, right? Graze it to the right stubble height. Bahia grass, we recommend don't graze it shorter than 3 inches, right? You can leave 5 inches, you'll have a faster recovery. So the animal come and graze. What happened is during the growing season, about 21 days is back to his original growth. And that will be probably where the forage is not accumulating anymore. You got a steady state right there. So, and we come and graze it again. We wait for 21 minutes, for 21 days, and then the forage will recover. So now we have a scenario 2. So we will graze this forage, the same forage, but at shorter stubble height. Shorter than it should be, less than 3 inches, let's say. What happened is in the same time frame of 21 days, the forage cannot recover its full potential. It just go to that height where actually should be grazed at that time. And then we graze it again because we don't have any other place to the cows, right? We graze it again to a shorter stubble height. And what happened is it cannot recover again. And then the last scenario, and the extreme one, is when we really hurt our pastures, right? Instead of just slightly grazing under the stubble height, we graze it down to the ground. And we have seen that happens many times in the spring or in the fall when the forage is not growing actively, and we have probably the same stocking rate that we have during the summer, right? We graze it really short, and then the forage is not able to recover. Actually, you have very little growth there in about 21 days or 28 days, and we graze it shorter again. And I think, as I mentioned to you, we keep focusing on what we see, right? The plant is there, it's short. We can see the dung piles, we can see the fire ant mounds, everything. But what we don't see is what's going on underneath, right? And that's exactly what happened. So the forage does not have the reserve structure to regrowth anymore. And we keep doing that for years. And then what happened is we have what we call the pasture decline. Why it declined? Declined because it was too intensive grazing. We removed too much plant and never gave the plant the chance to recover. And I will show you just some data that will illustrate what we just mentioned to you. In these jigs pastures here, we graze it with high stocking rates or low stocking rates, or that means very short or at the adequate height on the stubble height for 2 years. And you can see here that when we graze it with high stocking rates, look at what happened to the jigs population in the pasture. It came down from 95% jigs to 39. And common Bermuda grass became almost 36% of your pasture. And then we also have the broadleaf weeds. So that's what happened. The jigs die and gave the opportunity for the other plants to come. So this is the picture of the jigs that were grazed well. It looks pretty good, doesn't it? So it has the population of jigs there is growing well. And this is the pasture that was grazed short. Same time frame, same area, same everything, same fertility. But this one was grazed really short for about 2 years. And this is the picture of the animals. You can probably tell me which animals graze in the short pastures and which animals graze in the taller pasture, right? You can see that clearly also in the body condition of the animals. So not only you lose body condition of the animals and animal production, but you lose your pasture, right? Again, as I mentioned, is one of the causes that have been very active in this pasture decline that many times we can see in some ranches. So one of the things that I see in most of these overgrazing places is some practical signs, right? The person is complaining that he has low pregnancy rates, is probably trying to blame on the cow, but the neighbor's cows are all bred, probably by his bull that could cross the fence. A lot of people, they just include the yard in the rotational grazing, right? Because they don't have forage in the pastures, so they start grazing the aisles, grazing the yard, and that is not a good sign. And the last one, people start blaming on the fence. And they start saying that probably 10 strains is not sufficient to keep because his cows are too wild. But in fact, the problem is there is not enough forage there. The cows, what they are doing is just getting out to try to eat something. And the last information that I'll pass to you is a project that I started a few years, and I try to do with the pastures something similar to what we do with the cows. And what is that? Is probably try to give a pasture condition score to the forage and pastures that we have. And we try to make it simple. And we have the 3, that is a pasture that is well covered, a 2, that is a pasture that will have about 75% of the desirable forage in cover. And you have pasture condition score 1. That is when you see that probably half, 50% of what you have on the pasture is not what you want, right? Just 3 simple measurements. And then if it gets below 50%, in this case, Bahia grass, for example, is all pasture condition score 1, right? They all fall in that category. And that is important because I think what we want is with that score to trigger a management practice. So why it's important to have cover? Because if you decide to do some fertilization, for example, nitrogen fertilization, you have a better recovery of your investment. So you apply nitrogen, you apply 1 pound of nitrogen, you get 25 pounds of forage for 1 pound of nitrogen. However, when you have 50% of your pastures that are weeds or bare soil, you just get 16%, half of the efficiency. So your investment, the return on your investment is just half. And then it can trigger for you to have some fertilization recommendations there. So in the 3, if you decide fertilize, fine. If the 2, you just fertilize the pastures 2. If you haven't fertilized your 3s, right? So you fertilize first your 3s, then your 2, if you need the extra forage. Otherwise, you also may decrease the efficiency. And your pasture, the pasture condition score 1, probably will be the ones that we would say that will not be a good investment to fertilize and probably should be in a replanting plan, right? You probably have to focus in trying to replant those Bahia grass pastures or any other species in the near future in order to recover the pasture, have a good stand, and then the new pasture will start with that condition score 3 that will be the desirable. That's the information that I had to share today. I would like just to remind you, we have a podcast that is monthly, and we talk to a lot of producers in Florida about some management things related to cattle, forages, or actually some researchers as well about some new research that they are doing. So if you are interested, just go to the website. It's a 15-minute podcast. So I think you're gonna find interesting to learn more about the other beef cattle and cow-calf operations here in the state. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will turn it back to Lauren.
Dr. Vendramini, we do have a couple of questions to bring up to you. The first one that came in earlier was, why did the Pasco County not benefit like the other counties did when you were talking about lime?
And that's a good question, Dustin. It's not that the Pasco County will not benefit. The only thing that I tried to show you is there was that specific ranch in Pasco County that have a problem in management and high pH. But any place in the state of Florida, if you have low pH, that will be lower than the 5.5, or if you have too high pH, that will be detrimental for forage production, regardless of the location. The only thing that I show is that specific picture was in a pasture in Pasco County, and I have seen those high pHs not only in Pasco County, I have seen a lot in Polk County as well, and Hardy County. So regardless of the location, pH is important. And I didn't try to pick on Pasco County. It's just because the picture was taken there.
I got you. The second question was, during the winter and after a frost, can you hurt the grass by grazing it too low?
And that's also a good question. What happens is you don't hurt the grass as much if you are overgrazing during the winter, because there is no stimulus for the grass to grow. Most of our grasses, warm season perennial, they are actually almost dormant in that winter. So the grass doesn't have the motivation to grow, so it doesn't mobilize the reserves to grow. But as you can see in the winter after frost, probably that will not be the case, but that is very important in the spring. That for us here in South Florida, start early, right? Our people are actively grazing Bahia grass in March, right? So you get that March time when the grass is trying to grow, it's using the reserves to grow and use all the nutrients that it can. So that is the critical time. So that's the time, so do not overgraze at that time. But during the winter, I think it's much safer and it doesn't hurt the pasture as much.
All right, and finally, they're asking the podcast link. Can it be showed again or sent out, or maybe put it in a chat to everyone, or where's a real easy way to find that link to your podcast?
Yes, I'll make it available here in the chat, and it's in our the Range Cattle Research and Education Center website. So under my name, we'll have the podcast link. It's on YouTube. You can type on YouTube my name there, and the podcast will show up. There are a few ways to reach it, but I'll make sure that I'll copy and paste here in the chat, so it will be available.
Thank you. That's all the questions we have submitted thus far.
Thank you, Dr. Vendramini. So the next portion of our program is our awards presentation. I'm Bridget Stice. I'm a member of the Florida Cattlemen's Institute and Allied Trade Show. And as the past chair of the Trade Show and Institute, I have had the opportunity to present the Silver Spur Award, as well as the chair of the awards committee, I have the opportunity of presenting our other awards. So at this time, we're going to show a video that describes or presents those videos. We weren't able to present them in person, so we're going to show a video that explains the videos and shows our award winners. Each year, members of the Florida Cattlemen's Institute and Allied Trade Show Planning Committee recognize individuals who contribute to the Cattlemen's Institute and the beef cattle industry as a whole. 2 awards are presented, the Silver Spur Award and Outstanding Commitment and Support Award. The Silver Spur Award is presented this year to Lauren Butler, the current chair of the Florida Cattlemen's Institute and Allied Trade Show Planning Committee. The committee is made up of IFAS Extension faculty and allied industry members. The delivery and execution of this program requires great leadership. This year, Lauren has done an exemplary job in providing leadership to the Planning Committee, especially as we navigate the challenges presented by the pandemic. We present to Lauren Butler the 2021 Florida Cattlemen's Institute and Allied Trade Show Silver Spur Award. The Outstanding Commitment and Support Award is presented to an individual who has not only made contributions to the success of the Florida Cattlemen's Institute and Allied Trade Show, but has also made an impact on Florida's beef cattle industry. This year, we present this award to Mr. Jim Parks. James Edward Parks is a longtime supporter of the efforts of the Florida Cattlemen's Institute and Allied Trade Show. One of the first and continuing exhibitors of the trade show, Mr. Parks has supported the program and efforts of the Institute and Allied Trade Show. More than an exhibitor, Mr. Parks has provided leadership and support to educational efforts of IFAS Extension beyond the Institute and Allied Trade Show. The following video is an excerpt from the Florida Cattlemen's Honorary Director Award he received in 2017.
James Edward Parks, better known as Jim, was born on Christmas Day in 1944 in Bradenton, Florida. Jim grew up helping on his parents' and grandparents' cow-calf operation. In high school, Jim was involved in FFA and served as secretary for his local FFA chapter. Jim graduated from Manatee High School in 1961. After high school, Jim married Linda Busby in 1963. In 1964, Jim enrolled in the United States Air Force and is a Vietnam veteran. While in the Air Force, Jim learned the ins and outs of the radio and communication business. When he left the service, Jim used what he learned to secure a job at Florida Power and Light, where he maintained and serviced all the radio systems. While working for Florida Power and Light, Jim purchased an anniversary gift for his wife Linda, a family business called Come See, Come Save in 1974. Come See, Come Save is a local feed store in Bradenton, Florida, and still operating 43 years later, earning the distinction of Dealer of the Year for the past 10 years. While still employed with FP&L, Jim bought a second agribusiness called Parish General Store, also a feed store, in 1987. In 1989, Jim retired from FP&L and put his main focus on his 2 businesses. Jim has been very active in all aspects of the community and youth programs. He has been a longtime supporter of the Manatee County Fair, serving as director of the Fair Board. He's a current member of the Manatee County Environmental Land Management and Acquisition Committee. He has served in several positions on the Manatee County Cattlemen's Association and Manatee County Farm Bureau. In 2002, Jim was inducted into the Florida 4-H Hall of Fame. And in 2005, he was inducted into the Manatee County Agricultural Hall of Fame and was also named Outstanding Agriculturalist. Jim and Linda have 2 children, Jimmy and Ginger, and 4 grandchildren. Today, Jim still runs both of the family businesses and also runs a commercial cow-calf operation.
We present to James Jim Edward Parks this honorary award for his outstanding commitment to the Cattlemen of Florida and his enduring support of the Florida Cattlemen's Institute and Allied Trade Show. This concludes our award presentation. At this time, we're going to take a break. It's 2:40 p.m. We're going to come back in 10 minutes at 2:50.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Dr. DeLarenzo, if you want to pull your slides up.
Yep.
Go ahead. We're going to resume our program with Dr. Nicolas DeLarenzo. He joined the University of Florida as an assistant professor in animal sciences at the North Florida Research and Education Center in Marianna. His primary research and extension interests are in the area of beef cattle nutrition, with the objective of improving the efficiency of use of forages, minimizing the environmental impact. His research focuses on ruminal metabolism and fermentation, emissions of greenhouse gases, and nutrient excretion in cattle systems. Dr. DeLarenzo is presenting on impacts of shorting supplementation. Dr. DeLarenzo?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? The screens look good. You're seeing my screen? Perfect. Well, first of all, I want to thank all the organizing committee. I hadn't had a pleasure of being in this program before, and I always wanted to go in person. And I echo what Dr. Mastrodicasa said. This is one of the earliest invitations. I still remember when they told me about a year ago about being in this program. I had no idea what was going to happen a year from now. And yeah, boy, we did not have any idea what we were going to get into it. So definitely it's been a pleasure to share this program with the other speakers, and very, very good program. And just wanted to emphasize, so the whole idea with my talk today, try to come back to the effect of shorting, or what are the things that I think we should not do under this situation, which is not easy. It's a lot easier to say than do it, but definitely I can show you at least the impact of shorting supplementation, and hopefully convince you of looking at feed in a little different way than as a cost. So with that, I really like the moving on theme that we have for that. So that when I saw the moving on, the first thing it came to my mind is, as we're leaving December, we're getting ready to be done with 2020, and I have to admit, when this picture came across one of my emails, and I thought, well, is this what we're getting into? We're leaving December. How is January going to be? Are we gone from that situation with one bull into another? I certainly hope not. And my message is that I think we're going to be okay. I think we got through the worst. But I cannot help to think that if well, what's ahead of us? Is it going to be worse? I certainly, like I say, I hope not. And I think there's things we can do to prevent things from getting worse, at least on regards of the cattle production and management scenarios. So with that, I hate to remind you this. This is something that basically what got us and where we are right now. A lot of this was discussed. Chris Prevatt did a great job at showing all the impacts of the market. So I hate to, like I say, remind you of this, but there is a really great publication that was, I think it was commissioned by NCBA, that shows losses in the tune of 9,200 million just due to COVID-19, and that was done on April 8th of 2020. So it's really drastic. When you look at that, not many industries can recover from something like that. We went through some shutdowns of packing plants at a critical time. Prices drop as much as you see it there. And what you see there actually would have been when this webinar, this was put together. I think Dr. Thrift was part of what would have been our program for the beef cattle short course. We have Randy Black talk about the impact of COVID, and from that talk, I got some of this slides. This is the other one that sort of relates to why, and I want to just use these two slides to put a little perspective of where we are and why. We already went through we're in the phase of rebuilding our herd. We're probably stabilizing right at that 31 million, a little over 31 million head, but we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know the impact of COVID yet, which some, at least at April, it was suggested that maybe there'll be some downsizing. So it's going to be critical to stay in business, to be profitable and do some of the things that Chris discussed earlier. Pay attention to market signals, keep it simple. I really like that comment from Chris. And also measure and be able to whatever we do to have a way to gauge that impact of that change, whether it's different changes in the supplemental program, whether we're talking about investing in feed. And you will hear me say that a lot. I really would like to start looking at feed at a critical times as an investment rather as a cost. I know we always talk, and I still talk a lot about the cost of feeding or feed costs, but at certain times I'm more and more convinced that feed is more an investment than a cost, and I'm hope to be able to show you that. I apologize for repeating this. I had spent a couple of years since I've used it, but this illustrates the point that I try to make. This shows, let me see if I can work the pointer here. There you go. No, not the one. There. So what I want to show you here in green is what are the pounds per day of TDN. And again, I want to keep it really simple. TDN and crude protein. Energy, total digestible nutrients, is a proxy for energy, and crude protein, the two main nutrients, if you will, that we should be concerned in cow-calf and even backgrounding operations. So if we look at months and calving, and I can make it easier for me, this being January, which is our typical calving season. Maybe if you're in the South, this will be moved a couple months to maybe October, November. And if you look at that, and this is a typical production cycle of Bahia grass, and Dr. Vendramini explained why we really like Bahia grass so much here in Florida, and it's hard to argue with that. If you look at that and consider the crude protein and TDN of Bahia, this is what that pasture will be providing in the dashed line here, production of TDN, and both dashed lines are what pasture provides. And you can see in the axis here is pounds per day. And these are the requirement of a typical cow. I put it 1200, so maybe not as typical, maybe more North Florida typical cow, 20 pounds of peak of milk production. And what you will see right away is there's two areas where supplementation will be needed in terms of protein, in terms of energy here. So if that cow calves in January and we have a typical production of that pasture of no more than 8 pounds of TDN per day, we're going to be in deficit of energy, big deficit of energy, all the way until we pass those months of high requirements of milk production. And the same thing on the tail end of the year, which at this point is maybe a little bit less of a concern, because by then, hopefully, we would have weaned a calf, and this is the prime time to maybe start putting some condition, although arguably it could be done quite a bit sooner than this time. It might be a little too late if we try to start putting condition just towards the end of the next calving. Protein-wise, the same thing, except that the magnitude is a little less, but this is critical to, even though the magnitude is less, become more critical in terms of heifer development. So we will be in need of supplementation, whether we like to admit it or not, with our typical forages. There might be some exception, maybe definitely with winter grazing, where this curve is totally changed. That is, if we can have enough winter grazing by early January, which here for the most part we do in a normal year. And if that's the case, we still might have to deal with some shortages towards the end of the summer. That transition summer to winter, it's critical for us. It's one of the worst times of the year in terms of supplementation. And that's where we need to keep in mind this, especially in a crazy COVID year like this. We need to start thinking about how we can avoid falling into the temptation of maybe shorting in protein or just supplement, because market prices are not right for us. So I just realized I left my little thing in there. So just to continue with the point I'm trying to make, we will have different impacts if we're talking about cow-calf operation or mostly growing a heifer. To keep it simple, I'm going to talk about growing a heifer versus maintaining a cow. Perhaps the impact is different, the economic impact is different, and how much it would take us to get where we want to get it is different. But the main consequence of that, even though the different animals, they have different impacts, one thing that it's going to become obvious is that the message is the same, whether we want to admit it or not, whether we are prepared or not. Like this picture shows, we will have a consequence of that we're going to have to pay. So we're never ready for some of these situations, but at least we know enough about biology to know that there will be a consequence of not being ready or shortening, whether it's supplemental protein or energy, our cattle, and I may be able to show you some numbers on that. So that's one of the main messages that I want to make. So I'll divide this briefly into two different scenarios, because there's, like I say, quite different. They're both scenarios. So cow-calf operation with hay-based diets during the winter, which is very typical here and in many other places, whether you can almost equate this to the fair limpo grass in the south, maybe just stockpile limpo grass, any other type of hay, Bahia, Bermuda. There may be some slight difference in terms of protein, very slight in terms of energy, but it will be, there's always going to be some deficiency, particularly in terms of energy, when I'll like to show you here in a minute. It's never a good idea. That's pretty obvious, but you might be wondering why. Well, I hope to be able to show you why. There is, reviewing all the literature, you will recognize that there is some inflection. You can argue it's 8% or 7% point of crude protein, where below that it is critical to start thinking about supplemental protein. There's a ton of literature in that. There is oversimplified rules of thumb that you might have seen or heard, which I've been applying in some cases, and they work. So with a different, or a ratio of 7:1 TDN to crude protein, and just looking at that as engaging that as whether you need protein supplementation or not. Basically anything greater than that is going to imply that you would have a response to supplemental protein. And you can think of that, a very typical scenario I always think of in those terms is a Bahia grass that may be at 49 TDN, and medium to low quality Bahia grass hay that it may not go over 7 or 8% crude protein. So in that situation, we may want to start considering supplemental protein. There's some effects also quite documented in terms of fiber digestion. If you think about that, that's all it is here, mostly fiber. More than maybe perhaps 2/3 of this is fiber. So we want to, I call quote unquote, activate that rumen, basically engage those rumen microbes that are become our cheapest and best source of protein into producing more of that protein, just by sometimes adding just a little bit of energy and sometimes a little bit of protein, of the right form of protein. And that I will talk a little bit in a minute. But here's one of the main concepts, and one that I often find as challenging. As long as there's sufficient hay, and I say hay, it could be stockpile forage, then high concentrate, like whether we use high protein concentrated liquid supplement containing urea, will help on a cow-calf situation, and that's very well documented. We have tons of research done, particularly in the South and at the owner research station at RCREC. They've done a lot of work looking at the effect of supplemental urea with supplemental molasses with urea to the 24% protein, sometimes even more. And that works. I mean, there's no question about that. There's been on a cow-calf system where your requirement may be in the lower end of what needed. There's many variants of that, but in all cases, it seems to work. It helps maintain body condition. It helps maintain those rumen bugs happy enough that will keep digesting whatever fiber can be digested. In fact, there is some synergistic effects in the rumen. There's also quite a bit of literature on that. This is when I'm getting into looking at that as a supplement, as an investment. So thinking about that protein or energy as an investment, and as with any investment, you have to start looking at the return on that investment. So that's the concept of return on the investment. It has many ways to be calculated, but the one that I always like to use, and I put a lot of emphasis on this, is the feed cost gain. Maybe this is my bias from my years working in the feedlot industry, but I really like to think in terms of feed cost of total cost of gain, but at least just to keep it very simple, feed cost of gain. So in other words, what that is just this is not anything else than the measuring what's the bang for your buck that we're getting, basically. So what's the cost of that feed in dollars per pound? And when we can measure, and this is really tricky, because we can measure feed conversion easily on a growing animal if we can measure intake, but on a cow that is maintaining condition, it gets a little trickier. But the concept is the same. It's basically, what are we getting for that extra dollar of supplemental protein or energy? And then this is just some example from a backgrounding diet from a couple years, and I'll show you some more recent numbers. Not too long ago, we were feeding $220 a ton protein and feed, which could be, right now, it could equate to a 50-50 corn, gluten, soy hull diet at 11 cents per pound. So with feed conversion, the growing animal, this is in younger animals, and with a little bit of, quite a bit of fiber, at least 15% on that, 20% on that diet, we can get to 6.5, maybe 7 to 1 conversions. That gives us, and this again is just an example of how to calculate that. Our feed cost again is 72 cents per pound. The key in all of this, always compare this to market price. So this is better than market price. You can put, keep in mind, this is only feed. That's the F here is feed cost again. So to that, you have to add your cost of delivering that feed, however you want to call that. If you're in a growing yard, you want to call the yardage, the cost of delivering your hay plus the supplement, the labor, everything goes in there. As long as this number plus the cost of delivering that feed is better than market price, then we're good. We're probably going to be okay. And those are scenarios that I like to think about feed as an investment. And I have plenty of those that I can show you, at least here in North Florida. But it gets tricky, especially when it comes to fluctuating markets and times of crisis like this, or at least a couple months ago, where we didn't know what markets were going to be as far as corn, and corn drags everything else. So whether the supplemental protein and energy, many times it's derived from that. So we looked at that feed cost again as a one measurement that we would like to evaluate our supplemental responses again. So there's many ideas that you might have heard me talk in many other instances in Florida, and we have a lot of corn and soybean byproduct like the soy hulls and corn gluten. If you follow, or if you've ever been familiar with our Florida wool test, we've been doing for almost 10 years now. 85% of the diet in the Florida wool test is made up of corn gluten feed and soy hulls, and that's a really safe way to put gain on growing cattle, because we avoid a lot of the challenges that sometimes starch brings into high gaining animal or high eating animal like bulls. We are experimenting a little bit with corn and sorghum silage, and I'll share some number with you. Always looking at lowering the feed costs, liquid feeds, and with urea, it's really tough sometimes to beat the price of those, and they work. Like I say, I've been doing this or trying different types of liquid feeds in many different forms. And I know that we have a huge opportunity in terms of supplemental feed as well as delivery as a delivery mechanism for other bioactive compounds. That's some of the areas of research that we're exploring here in North Florida. Citrus pulp, I love citrus pulp. I always wonder how how long we're going to enjoy the prices that we get for citrus pulp in the context of all the challenges that the citrus industry is facing. But it's a great product, and I hope we can keep having it for many years. Cotton byproducts, certainly North Florida has been enjoying a lot of different byproducts with a high fluctuation in price. Seems to be related to the seasonality of the cotton business and the need to remove a bulky byproduct out of the premises quick. Distiller's grain is still a great potential supplemental feed, but we are facing some challenges now in the Southeast in terms of availability. And then there is a lot of industries that have developed around this using locally available byproducts to come up with commercial pellets, whether it's byproducts of waste feed, like could be some companies that are really taking advantage of that, or some companies here in North Florida are also coming up with pellets made out of byproducts of cotton, perhaps distillers and corn, at a very competitive price, and we have used those in the past with really good results. The key is always, and you might have heard me say many times, is to buy cheap and to buy at the right time, which seems to be as simple as that is. It is not. It is one of the greatest advantages that we have in the Southeast. We do have that map that shows Florida commodities at a glance. It basically tells you how diverse the state is in terms of industries, and a lot of those I almost can relate to almost every, except for alligator maybe, but every one of those industries may come up with some form of byproduct that we may be able to use in our cattle industry, and we even have feedlot developed around the concept of waste vegetables, and we have a lot of that in South Florida, vegetable production. I'm the big fan of the cotton byproducts in the industry, as I say before, and we have a lot of citrus again. So there are a lot of possibilities, but we have to, in many cases, purchase those at the right time if we want to make that feed cost effective. And with that, it comes all the logistic challenges that you also hear me talk a lot about. This is here at NFREC, we in the lower right, we tend to buy bulk when we can. We're limited. I mean, limited, it seems like I'm complaining, and I'm not. We're limited to 8 commodity bait, which is, it's a lot for what we do. But there's time where I wish we have 10 commodity bait, because we could use that many when it comes to the amount of cattle that we have at a certain times of the year, especially with the bull test on full swing. We really could use that. Scenario like the one on the left that emphasize logistic challenges of feed storage, and there's many of that. There's plenty of that I don't need to tell you about. But anytime we can consider buying at the right time and doing what we can to store, we should consider that. I tell you, I'm even now considering in the context of this price variability and everything else. We have 2 years now, we've been playing with gin trash, basically cotton byproducts. And I'm even considering the possibility of bagging, using 12 feet ag bags, plastic, and then start bagging cotton byproduct. We can get a lot of that at the right time of the year, and I can show you how we can make that work in the context of a supplementation program. I've been playing quite a bit with silage. And this, what I'm going to show you here is a video. I'll start playing it when I'll talk. Hopefully you can see it. This was one of my students was able to shoot this. We started playing with corn silage here at NFREC, and with silage it comes the issue of the delivery. So we try something and an approach that is very simplistic, that you can almost see it, that I don't have to explain it too much. But this is the 3rd and the 5th wire that are hot. So basically we have a sling, like a gate, like a spring gate type, and this is a hot wire, and then a hot wire on the top. I argue they may not even need the top one. And what we are seeing, I'll just play while I finish explaining. This is a 12-foot bag. What we started doing, this is 106 heifers from our, this was would have been earlier last year, so it would have been probably, well, maybe September of last year. That's when we opened this, the first of this bag. So again, this is the first year we're trying this, but we're very pleased with what we see in terms of reducing labor costs. Every day what we do is we move this about a foot, roughly a foot on this 12 feet bag will give you close to 2 tons of feed, if not more. And that will give us plenty for this 106 heifers. So I'm looking at this as a potential way to develop heifers, cutting on feed costs, because one of the big issues, corn silage or sorghum silage, it may give you a pretty low cost per ton, but the delivery can make it troublesome. So we're trying to figure out ways to deliver that without really incurring a big labor cost. So we did this pilot trial. This is more of an extension project than anything else. And we have a couple producers in the area already working on feeding corn and sorghum silage. So we're excited about generating some numbers on the feed cost gain with those different scenarios. And this is a little accident that we have that I like to share with you. It was a study, but it wasn't a study, but it turned out to be a great demonstration. What I have here in the top right, you'll see is a little device that we purchased. It's called Super Smart Feed. Basically, it's like a grain bin on wheels with 4 bins that, based on radio frequency ID, so RFID of cattle, they approach this unit. You can see here they have some lanes in there. And if it is the right EID, it will drop a certain amount of feed as long as the animal is in there. So it has sensors that can sense that. And it's all, you can program it in a computer. So we're experimenting with precision feeding. So this would have been the same lot of 106 heifers. This actually was a cow study, but we have this machine along with the hay that I showed you in the previous slide, the silage. So basically we have 106 heifers eating corn silage free choice. We did not measure intake. We couldn't measure intake out of the bag, but we were able to measure the amount of supplemental protein that we were feeding. So we started playing with some cubes. This was not intended to be like this. If you do the numbers here, this would have been our 106 heifers in the study, but for reason they were still trying to figure it out, and I think it has to do with animal to animal variation. Some animals never approach. In fact, 32 of them ate less than a pound of 20% cubes that we were delivering with this Super Smart Feed is the name of this unit. So by accident, I generated this, or my students gave me the data, and we kind of turned it into this slide that I could serve the purpose of showing basically what the whole idea with this talk is, the effect of shorting protein on growing heifers. So we wanted to develop these heifers on corn silage. That corn silage had more than close to 30% starch, so it's really good. We were not concerned at all about energy. I think we got more energy than we needed. There was a question of protein we knew we were short on. So this 20 pounds, we were targeting 5 pounds was the maximum. And we have 23 of those heifers were eating what we were assigned. 28 were only eating between 3 and 4 pounds. So what you see here, these 5 categories are 23 heifers only ate 4 to 5, 28 ate 3 to 4, 15 heifers ate 2 to 3 pounds per day of the cubes, and only 7 ate 1 or 2, and 32 of them did not even approach or were very timid, and they, for whatever reason, and that's a bit of a concern for us when we start this trial. It might mean that we need to pre-select cattle that are or train them for a little longer time. That could be part of the problem. But anyway, if I wanted to generate such a nice graph when doing a study, I probably would have not been able to. But here it shows the effect that protein supplementation has on average daily gain in growing heifers. So if nothing else, you can look at going all the way from 0 or even losing. I'm not really sure about this. I mean, how much the losing part of it, I think on average probably would have been about 0. But we can have a big impact, especially in growing heifers, and that impact translates into gain into the cost of having that heifer develop. Chris talked about earlier about the cost of each one of those heifers develop in different times of the year. This is exactly what happens when that heifer is developed in a way that it's suboptimal and may miss a breeding season. You may also, so moving away from the heifer for a minute, then I'd like to touch on the issue of shorting cows now. And this is something you might have heard me or see me present several times. I apologize if you haven't, but I like to insist on this because one of the best studies that I did in terms of getting a handle on hay intake. We have 120 cows in our feed efficiency facility. If you're not familiar, this is what it looks like when it's clean. It's not always like this, but this is a good day to take a picture. And we had 120 cows. 60 were weaned at approximately 5 months post calving. 60 were maintained with the calf suckling. So one side of the barn was cow calf, the other one weaned cow. 5 cows or pairs per pen, and we have 12 pens in each treatment. Each individual cow, we were able to measure intake of Tifton 85 hay at 10.5 crude protein. So it's some of our best hay at the station. And 67% TDN, really good in terms of energy. So the main point beyond all of that, so we were able to measure over 56 days what that hay intake would be. I mean, the absolute number may not tell you much. So the calves, the suckle, so the cow calf, the calf were eating about 5 pounds, 5.3 pounds, while the cow was eating 21 if she was suckling. Weaned, they were eating 18, and that generated this number that really matches nicely with some of the literature. Basically, when we wean the pair, we're reducing that hay consumption by 32%. And where we're looking at only the cow, we may be looking at 15%, but those numbers are within the range of what's been reported. More importantly for me, I think, is this figure. So it's just a 1.7 versus 1.4. So in terms of body weight, our cows here at the station were eating 1.7% Bermuda grass, and they were only eating 1.4% of body weight, which is a lot less than what I always have used in the past. And I'm not sure, I don't say advocating this is an absolute truth, but I really would like for us to start measuring intake of hay, because we may be already shortening cows, whether even in a non-COVID year, just by assuming they're eating more hay than we have. The amount of waste in hay is also something is for another talk, but it's something that should not be taken lightly. If you ever had a chance to measure waste on whatever system you want, put a hay ring, the fancy of the hay ring with the cone and the pan on the bottom, hay trailer, or all the way to unrolling it on the ground. I can guarantee you you'll be surprised on some of those losses. So, and just to 2 more slides on this cow hay eating thing. So after 56 days, and this is something that we see in the field often, the cows that were suckling on hay only, that remember, there's now no supplemental feed at all. This is just hay. From 1,272 pounds dropped to 1,188, and I'll show you in the next slide the body condition to go, because I know this may not tell you much if I don't show you a condition score. There was a loss of 84 pounds basically on the suckle, whereas the ones that were weaned maintained their weight. Basically, there was no weight change. So that shows what the effect is whenever we have hay, supplemental hay, which is, I would say, decent to good quality, really good quality hay. We could maintain a cow if she's been weaned. That's what we see often in some operations. In terms of body condition, those same 2 cows, so they dropped from 4.9 to 4.7 in terms of, and they lost about like a tenth of a body condition score. But more interesting, when those cows were weaned and they were on that good quality hay again, they were able to recover some of that, which shows what we've seen many times. And I know there's been a lot of efforts. My colleagues, Philippe Moriel, have done a lot of work in RCREC and ONA, looking at the best of the optimal supplementation strategies, when it's best to put body condition. And this shows something that has been shown many times before, that really once that calf is weaned, even with some decent feed, you can see the effect very quickly on condition and trying to gain condition for our next calving. So are the cows eating enough to achieve maintenance? That's something, again, I would like to keep insisting on that question, because it's something that I think we need to tackle. Here I show you a little bit of, this actually was taken here at NFREC. It shows you some of the waste issues that we might have. And I just want to pose the question of the challenge that we may have sometimes if we're thinking about supplementing cattle. If we don't know enough what the hay is providing, it makes it really challenging to determine whether we have a cost-effective supplementation. So like I say, we may be shorting already cows as it is, especially if we're limit feeding hay, which I know it's not the majority of people, but I've seen cases where hay is fed on a limit basis. And going back just for a minute to the two concepts here, feed cost of gain and growing heifers. This was the master's thesis of Federico, one of my students that defended last year. We basically wanted to look at sorghum silage again and against a byproduct diet on growing heifers. So this is just a diet, don't pay too much attention of the details. We try to balance for protein as much as possible. And basically the main point is the one diet is a 90, you can simplify this to a 90-10, 90% sorghum silage, 10% distillers. I don't want to even worry about this. I'm a firm. At the same time, we were testing a product that some of you may know. But the main point for this slide that I want to make is the byproduct versus sorghum, because that was one of our main interests. The byproduct diet, actually, we needed to include a supplement to bring up the protein to the levels that we needed to match the protein that we had in the sorghum silage. But the important thing here is pay attention to this. The 63% was citrus pulp. We were able to buy citrus pulp at a fairly decent price that year. I believe we were in the $165 per ton range, which I'm not sure if we can do it now. And we had access to cotton gin trash at a much lower, and maybe $20 to $30 per ton range. So we thought we'll play with this and a little bit of liquid to come up with a fairly decent diet that I'll show you in the next slide here. Well, here I show you what it looked like. On the top, the sorghum silage base. On the bottom, what we call the byproduct diet. We backgrounded this heifer for 56 days with the idea of recording intake. So we measure again in our feed efficiency facility with our grow safe bunks. We measure intake. And this is the main slide that I wanted to share with you. So if you look at this after 56 days, we had a big difference in gain. We didn't know what to expect, to be honest. I suspected maybe the byproduct we're going to have greater gains. We definitely had more intake of those, about 3 more pounds of intake. And that was reflecting in gain. So 2.5 versus 1.5. So it's really easy to see the difference. So our byproduct diet cost us $186 a ton. The sorghum silage was not the best. It was the first time we did sorghum silage here in NFREC, and I hope we can do better because it only had 11% starch, and so it wasn't the most energy dense sorghum silage we could produce. But we were able to come out with $143 a ton feed. This is including the distiller, so including everything. This are the costs for those two. And as I say, 3 pounds more of intake in the byproduct diet that led to a difference in gain. And and percentage of body weight, you see here they're eating close to 3% versus 2.6 on the sorghum silage. And if you follow that, my previous slide, what's the feed cost again? Basically what we have is what I would consider an elevated feed cost again for the sorghum silage. I think again, we can do a lot better. What really hurt us here was that 14-to-1 conversion. And that's really the number that drives this, because I mean, even though it's a cheaper diet, when you're converting 14-to-1, each pound gain makes it expensive. Still, probably we would have been under including labor and feed delivery, we would have been under the market cost. We definitely did okay with the byproduct. I'm actually very excited about this. We're trying it again this year. We're going to try some other byproduct diets in an effort to put gains on a cost-effective manner. So this is going back to not only shortening cattle, but looking at opportunities for looking at feed as an investment. Of course, this requires feeding facilities, a feeder. So it may not be something that fits every operation, but there's an opportunity we cannot ignore. when we're trying to add value to Florida calves. As I've said many times, that's something I would like to do. What's the cost of missing a breeding? In a 90-day breeding season, this is perfect world. Beginning versus the end. So we're looking at 180 pounds of difference. If we win at the same time, and we see it year and year again, and our calf crop here at NFREC, we do have about 180 pounds difference that even in today's market, that is really slim. We're looking at a little over $230 of profit. I know I can design perhaps cost-effective strategies that may be below this. It's not easy to do every year, but it's something we may be able to do if our strategies push the calving season or helps us bunch up those calves toward the front of the beginning of the season. I think there is some room for supplementation there that could help. So just to begin wrapping up, I want to share two studies that we did at NFREC, Bahia grass hay, and this really illustrates the point of supplementing protein and hay-based diet, particularly in growing heifers. So these two studies were done in two different years. Basically, the materials and methods are the same for both, so I'm not going to concentrate on that. But we have 16 Bahia grass pastures of about 1.34 acre. Actually, it's 3.3 acres each. And this was done in several locations at NFREC, so I'm going to skip that. And this is the important part is this. Basically, to the left, no protein supplementation. To the right, protein supplementation with hay. And now I'll show you what the results of those were. So we have 24 pastures in the experiment 1, 16 pastures on experiment 2. The main difference between these two, I'm going to show you in a minute, was protein supplementation. So basically, you have the same hay, similar type of hay. At the same time, we were trying to test some different treatments, including calcium oxide. So if you see something white being poured on the face of the hay here, just to show you the logistical challenge that we had in the study. Basically, we would pour molasses and calcium oxide on the hay. We roll it back, we turn it back up, and then we roll it a little bit to try to make it evenly distributed. And then we fed it to cattle. And we went to the pasture and we fed it for 56 days. So I'm going to show you what happened. Don't pay too much attention to the three treatments because they didn't differ. But the main point out of this slide, experiment 1, hay only, whether we put molasses, which we did it the way that I just showed you. So we try to soak that with molasses. Didn't have the effects that we were hoping. Basically, cattle, you can say they did not gain. And on average, it might have lose or be right at 0. So basically, growing heifers fed hay of, I would consider this hay now, we're talking about Bahia grass. I believe I have that earlier, but I don't think it got to 8% protein. So nothing happened. So that illustrates the point of shortening again protein and something like this. It's going to get us nowhere in terms of the developing of those heifers with an average loss actually of, not quite 1/10 of a pound, but close. So we turned around that study. This was the same cattle. Basically, after measuring that, we dropped one of the treatments. We wanted to have molasses in both, so don't worry about the calcium oxide, because as I told you earlier, and you might have heard me present this before, we did not have a great success with that. So we just wanted to try 10% molasses on a dry matter basis. So all the hay had 10% molasses. And all we did different was 0.3% of body weight per day of cottonseed meal. And you can see here, this is actual study pictures. So Francine Henry now it's the one that did all the study, and we supplemented 0.3% of cottonseed meal to the hay-based diet. Look at the difference. If you go back to that net loss of close to 1/10 of a pound, now we were in the neighborhood of 1.2 pounds per head per day. Still not nowhere close what I would like this to be for a heifer development program. I like to push between 1.5 to 1.75 pounds per day for a good developmental rates for those heifers. But at least we were able to show the big impact that protein has. And when I do that math on this, we're talking about 1.5 pounds close to 2 pounds per head per day did the trick. That's all the difference between study 1, losing weight, and study 2, 2 pounds per day. And the cost at that point of that was about $0.25 per head per day. So when you look at the value of that $0.25, you can include, this does not include the feeding cost. So we still might have to add some of that, but you can clearly see that there is a cost-effective way to supplement cattle, at least with some of the byproducts that we have available. And to wrap up, we have developed this tool that you can find it, and I know we're going to have the slides available for everybody. So there's 2 ways you can download what we call the UF Hay Balancer. This is a tool that I put together a couple years ago, and I know several of you have provided input and have asked me to move towards the development of the next module of this, which will be the growing heifer. Right now, this is all designed for cows, and all it does is they give you basically with 2 or 3 inputs. It tells you, using the hay intake data that I generated here at the barn trial that I show you, it tells you the cost per day, per cow per day of supplemental programs when hay is the main feed. So basically it's a hay balancer. It's meant to be this simple. It has 2 things here. If it's green, it shows a check mark. If it's red, it tells you you'll need more TDN. Only TDN and crude protein. I'd like to reiterate Chris Prevatt comment, keep it simple. So supplemental programs for cow-calf operations, TDN and protein, that's more than plenty. So if you need any questions about this, feel free to reach out to me, and I try to make this available. So with that, I'm gonna wrap up by hopefully getting you to think about supplemental fees as an investment rather than a cost. That's sort of my main point today. There's time where that cost of supplemental feed really pays off many times. And the summary and conclusion from that is the same thing. So look at it as an investment. This is not the right time to cut corners, even though it might be tempting. Post-pandemic beef demands have been strong, and the herd size might be strong. So this is just, I'm not nowhere close to being an economist, but I wonder if favorable price might be in the future. Certainly, Chris Prevatt's presentation seems to imply that. Shorting energy or protein on heifer will be really costly, and that's something that I hope by now you're able to see. A missed pregnancy at the end of breeding season is very costly, way more than that. So keep that in mind when we talk about replenishing those body condition. Take advantage of products and seasonality, prices and seasonality as much as possible. And as always, keep in touch with the extension agent. We have a huge amount of resources here in the Florida system to be able to attend all your needs and be able to help you if you have any more questions on supplementation program. So with that, that's all I have. I guess I forgot to add my thank you slide, but I'll turn it back to you, Lauren. I'm not sure, or Dusty.
Dr. DeLarenzo, there is one question. Are iron clay peas sufficient supplement for protein feeding?
Oh, good. What a good question. Let me go to the chat. Iron clay peas?
Iron clay cow peas.
Yeah, I don't have much experience with. I don't know what the protein content of that would be, and if anybody ever experienced with that, and we do have a lot of what I would call weird byproducts sometimes that we need to do more research on. This might be one of them. So does anybody know what the protein?
I know that cow peas were certainly used as supplemental, crop.
As a legume. Yeah.
For many years as a legume, right? So there is some protein there, but I wouldn't want to speak on the exact number.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just the question is more if anybody if they want to clarify that we're talking about like a protein bank type, like what do they call, like forward grazing, or just some way to supplemental protein through grazing. If that's the approach, I don't know if Dr. Vendramini still here and have done any work with cow peas, but I certainly haven't.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. DeLarenzo.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Our final speaker is Dr. Todd Thrift. And Dr. Thrift has been with the University of Florida's Department of Animal Science in a 70% teaching capacity and a 30% extension position in beef cattle management. His teaching appointment has him teaching cow-calf management, beef cattle nutrition, and stocker feedlot management. His extension appointment has him focusing on beef quality assurance and national animal ID. His presentation is cull or keep, cost of keeping the cull cow. And you have to say that 10 times fast before you start, Dr. Thrift.
All right. Well, I don't know that I can say it 10 times fast. We'll say it as fast as we can and work our way through this a little bit this afternoon. They've challenged me with talking about culling cows and keeping cows and the cost of keeping a cow. And I'm going to draw in a little bit from what Nicolas just showed you and talk about that as we go through here. But if you think about normal culling in a just a generic herd of 100 head, there are some reasons why all of us cull cows. Old would be the predominant one that's at the top of that list. A cow that's aged, she's lost teeth with a broken mouth, or she has no teeth anymore with a smooth mouth. A cow that's open for whatever reason at whatever stage in her life would represent another big chunk of those cows that we would cull because of failure to reproduce. But on top of that, there's quite a few more. And I just hypothetically threw these numbers down. There's not a lot of data behind that. But, you know, you've got a cow every year that's got an udder issue. You've got a cow that lost a calf or raised a pretty sorry calf. You've got a cow with maybe some kind of a structural issue, feet problems, leg problems. And sometimes feet and leg and other issues are really just an old cow problem. So that kind of goes hand in hand. Eye issues like cancer eye can come up in some herds and be an issue. With the average age of our producers today being 65 years old, disposition issues are considerably more important. Cows that are a problem to pen, a problem to handle, cows that want to run you over, often get a ride to town maybe before their productive life is up. And then there can be disease issues with cows that are thin and non-responsive to any kind of treatment we give them, unthrifty, maybe a cow that has difficulty calving and doesn't recover very well. With that said, we would lose 15 to 20 cows a year from a culling standpoint, depending on what your culling criteria are, which is a 15 to 20% cull rate in this particular example. Now, if you look at USDA data and you look at the reasons for culling, it aligns fairly well with what I just talked about. About a third of cows are culled for being old, and probably a third of the cows are culled for being open. But the next biggest reason for culling cows was somebody needed money. And if you look at the profile and structure of our industry and the cow-calf producers that are out there, many are part-time. And when it comes time to make a truck payment or buy a new washing machine, a few cows cashed in out of the savings account may go a long ways to keeping that cash flow or keeping us solvent from that standpoint and out of debt. Then the issues go down considerably, where we talk about sorry calf or udder, disease, eyes, feet and legs, disposition, certainly all important and reasons producers cited for culling cows, but really less important at old, open, or needing money. I've talked about this subject with a lot of people in the state, and a lot of them have asked me to develop maybe an economic model for when to cull a cow based upon her age. You know, when do we need to get rid of her? When is it time to be up? I know producers that will cull any open cow over the age of 7, regardless. They just think that she's beyond the productive age. I think that's a mistake. I know producers that cull any cow over the age of 10, regardless of her pregnancy status, open or bred. I know some that cull cows anything over 14. To me, this needs to be on a case-by-case basis, a ranch basis. It's going to depend highly upon your breed type of your cow herd. It's going to depend upon your management. So, you know, if you look at the pie chart there, the biggest piece of that pie, 53%, is culls that are 10 years and older. And so, but that's on a national basis. I don't think that fits Florida. I don't think it fits with our cow type. And I would propose a cull and probation designation. And I'm going to use that through the rest of this presentation to kind of split up and make decisions on some of these cows. I truly believe it's got to be a ranch to ranch, cow to cow, case by case basis to make some of these decisions. If you look at the distribution of cows in any given cow herd, it's not flat. Most cow herds will have a large percentage of very young animals. If we look at a 15% replacement rate on this 100 cow herd here, the majority of producers will have a lot of 2-year-old cows, 3-year-old cows, 4-year-old cows. Those are actually not your productive cows. Those are your kind of early young cows. They may have a long life in front of them, but they don't raise the biggest calves. They don't rebreed the best. Your best cows are going to be between 4 and probably 10 years of age. But cows over 10 years of age represent a very small portion of your herd when you evaluate that. These cows are a small chunk of the overall makeup of your herd. That's why there's not a bigger group of them in the culls group, because, you know, most of these cows we're looking at from a culling standpoint, that we're looking at culling on age, are 10 and over. Now, this is North Dakota data. I would draw this line right on out to 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 here in Florida because of our cow type. But it's not going to change. The slope may be different, and we may have a few more cows in some of those age groups, but it's still going to be on a downhill slide overall. Most of you are aware that a cow that stays around for a long time, like this 21-year-old cow, is probably going to be the cow that I need that's going to be the most profitable to me. I put her in there to talk just a little bit about longevity in the cow herd. If you're talking about the purebred industry and you were talking to a bunch of Angus breeders, or if we were in the dairy industry and we were talking to a bunch of Holstein breeders, they would talk about turning that generation over quick, turning her over very fast. And this year's model that we make, by next year, she's going to be old hat, and we need to replace her with something newer, something better. On the other hand, in the commercial beef industry, I'm greatly of the opinion that generation turnover is very overrated. What I'm interested in is that cow stays in my herd. For most of you in the cow-calf segment, that cow won't reach a break even until she's 6 to 7 years old. That means it's going to be about that long before you get her paid for. So I don't want to cull her. Chris showed us some data earlier on culling that cow at 8 years of age. And for some parts of the country, that's very normal. That's a mean culling age. I want it to be considerably higher than that. I want a cow that'll be productive until she's 15, because she's only paid for. It takes the first 6 or 7 years to get her paid for. Heifers are very expensive to purchase or produce, and they're also considerably less productive, particularly than our middle-aged cows. Cow longevity is very much influenced by breed and cross. It doesn't really matter what breed you want to look at. And when I say longevity, this means she has to have a calf every year. Some breeds will live a long time, like Brahman, but they may or may not have a calf every year. Straight bred cows do not have the longevity that crossbred cows have, particularly Brahman cross cows that we see down here at the bottom, 13, 14, 15 years, which is considerably better. And that would apply to our Brangus cross, Beefmaster cross, Brayford cross cows that a lot of us deal with here in Florida. Their longevity is considerably better. Their improvement in fertility keeps them in the herd longer. So less, and their ability to keep their teeth longer, all of those things impact their ability to stay with me over a longer time period. If you look, and again, this is some more North Dakota data. One of the things that you need to be careful of in keeping these old cows is you need to keep an eye on her. The data here from North Dakota shows that young cows, 2 and 3 year olds, aren't really that productive. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, even 9-year-old cows, fairly productive, and then they start to drop off. Again, you don't have many cows that fall in that 11 and 12 range in North Dakota, but we would have a lot of them down here in that range. In my observations, some of my smallest, sorriest calves have come from really aged cows. So I see a lot of people say, well, she's pregnant, she's 15, 16 years old. Let's go ahead and let her have one more calf. You better look at her under a microscope really hard. And you better look at what she just raised. If she just raised you a good calf and she's in good shape and she's got a good mouth, sure, keep her another year. But if her calf was very marginal and she's thin, she's not going to raise a good one next year. She needs to raise a calf larger than a heifer, or you need to put a heifer in her place. There is plenty of data that says the Brahman Hereford crossbred cows are productive to an older age. This is data out of East Texas, but the cows between the ages of 12 and 17 years old wean just as big a calf as a 3 to a 12-year-old. So some of them are not only productive, but they're productive into their advanced years. But in order to do that, you need to watch her. She needs to be on probation, in my opinion, after about year 12 from that standpoint. Maybe year 10 on some ranches, depending on what your breeding is. But you need to put her on probation and you need to watch her under a microscope to make sure she's doing her job. What about an open cow? Should you cull her? This is probably the big one. Most of us can figure out, well, that cow's old. She's got to go. She's not going to make it through another year. It's time, her time's up. But an open cow, one of the most common reasons for a cow to come open is that she's young. And we've already put a lot of money into her to get her to the point of being a 2-year-old having her first calf or a 3-year-old having her second calf. They're the most likely ones to come open on me. It might not be her fault. She might have had a late calf. It might be the bull's fault. You might have had poor bull fertility if you didn't have your bull semen checked. We can have poor body condition scores, result of a bad winter. Could be poor management, keeping those young cows in with my older cows and they lose condition. Could be a parasite load or a parasite burden heavier in a certain year. Generally, reproduction is lowly heritable. It is heritable, and you will improve your herd fertility by getting rid of open cows. But as my general rule of thumb, and I think many of you in the state, your rule of thumb is to give her one free skip and call it my fault. And put her on probation. So that first one's a freebie. The next time it's on her and it's her fault and she's got to go. And we'll talk about how to manage that fairly easily. The problem that I see a lot of people looking at is that requires records. It requires me to somehow write that down that she missed a calf this year and she's on probation. We can do that fairly easily. We'll talk about it later. The other problem I see is a lot of people that are in denial. If you've got a cow looks like this and she didn't have a calf last year and she didn't have a calf the year before that and she didn't have a calf the year before that, this probably ain't going to be her year next year. You know, these cows that have missed in multiple years, she needed to go a long time ago. She's a cow that is not going to all of a sudden turn the switch on and magically get pregnant next year. Something else is wrong hormonally, and she needed to go 3 years ago. This is a big subject that a lot of people bring up. Should I cull a cow for raising a sorry calf? Now, we've already called maybe 5% for being old, crippled, bad mouth, smooth mouth. Maybe of the 10 head that were open in my 100 head herd, we decided 5 of those were over, maybe 10 years old and open, and so they need to go. But 5 of them were younger than 10 years, and we might give them a second chance. So we make that decision. But what about the one raising kind of a mediocre calf? Again, it might not be her fault, I've watched a lot of cows. Calf got sick. Calf had a poor cyber. Maybe the neighbor's bull jumped in. Hard to say. More often than not, it was a late born calf. That's the biggest reason. Dr. DeLarenzo talked about that, and these 180 pounds that we're giving up because calf was born at the end of the breeding season versus the beginning. May have been difficult birth, and that calf had a really slow start. So it might not be her fault. And you don't really have to weigh the calves to do this. A lot of people say, well, I don't mammy my calves. I don't do all that. Take those sorry calves at marketing and branding and leave them in the pen overnight. If they have a mama, she'll be there tomorrow morning. Let them in the pen and identify her. She now goes on the probation list. I've seen this done a lot of different ways. So she's raising a sorry calf. We've determined that the calf's 4 months old and still only weighs 150, 200 pounds. Put her on probation, crop her ear, put a small X brand on her hip, something. She didn't miss a calf, but it's almost like she missed a calf because she's not raising a calf this year that's going to pay her bills. So she's now on my probation list, and we'll talk about how to handle those probation cows in just a little bit. The other reason a lot of cows are culled because of poor udders, and I see this one talked about a lot. It's something we used to deal with a lot with a lot of our Brahman cross cows, udder quality issues. They've actually done a neat study recently where they summarized data on almost 2,000 cows, and they just classified those cows as having a good udder or a bad udder. And a good udder, and they scored the udder suspension, they scored the teats, and if she had one bad teat and 3 good teats, well, they scored her as a bad udder. And that one bad teat was the one that it killed her entire score, and she had a bad udder. And so over the course, this was done over the course of about 10 years. And when you look at these cows, what they wanted to know was if she has a bad udder, she's got one big teat, you don't think the calf's really getting around to it, does she wean a smaller calf? And the research data says not really. She weans just as good of a calf as a cow with a good udder. So an udder that's a little unbalanced, an udder where she's got one large teat, those things don't concern me a lot, as long as she's pregnant and raises a good one. This is true as long as that calf can nurse unassisted within 6 hours. You get a cow that's got 4 big teats, it's a different story. She's got to go, okay? So I do the same thing. Cows with udder issues, they probably need to be on probation. They probably need to be looked at closely, and they need to be on probation. And I'm going to give her a chance until she really stumbles and fails, and then she's going to be gone. My probation cows are going to be handled in a different manner in just a minute, and we'll talk about that just a little bit more as we go through here. So the decision, and we could go on through feet and legs. I think that's a decision to cull a cow immediately. Cancer eye immediately. Some of those unthrifty disease, that's an immediate cull. We'll come back to that and discuss that toward the end. You may make the decision to cull her, but that's not always the same as the decision on when to market her. And this is an important point I'd like to drive home. I think for a lot of producers, you need to make the decision every fall. This cow, she's stumbling. She's had a sorry calf. She's got a bad udder. She's a little old. She's not holding the condition. Whatever the reason is, those probation cows are going to go on your short list to cull. Even your cull cow, we're going to separate this into probation and culls, but none of those have to be sold today. There's some options. If the reason for culling as a cow is open, but everything else about her is okay, keep her till the spring. There's a huge improvement in the market that I'm going to show you from a fall cow to a spring cow. In the packer cow market, in the bred cow market, you can feed her to improve her condition. provided you have resources to do that. You can move her to a terminal herd or group with all the cows in that group up for sale at any given time. Somebody comes by and wants to buy some cows, take them right over there and show them your probation cows. That's a cow that came open. So, and I really like that option. For a lot of you that have 2 breeding seasons, any cow that goes on probation goes in my terminal herd. That means she gets a Charolais bull, Simmental bull, Limousine bull, Angus bull, whatever it is, the rest of her life. She's gone on probation because she missed, because she's open, because she's got a little limp, because she's got corns between her toes. Whatever the reason is, she's on probation and she doesn't get a chance to leave any offspring in your herd anymore. Doesn't mean she needs to go right away. I think a lot of people would be well versed to take your cull cows in the fall, throw a bull with them and sell them as bred cows in the spring. There's probably a $200 to $250 swing on a cow from the fall cull cow market to a bred cow spring market. Now that all depends, and you need to really watch the market, and the things that Chris talked about earlier are very important, and you need to be aware of all of those as we go through here. When we think about marketing cull cows, some of the larger ranches in the state market straight to the packer. That has its advantage in that there's no commission, but you also stand the condemnations. So if a cow goes in there and she's a little bit thin and you thought she was fine, maybe the inspector found something wrong with her and she was condemned. Well, that means you don't get paid anything for her. You are paid on a carcass value. And if the cows are in good shape, that could be a positive. But plants have differing sets of standards and they don't all agree. It's not like the fed beef plants where they have choice beef and select beef and maybe prime beef. They all kind of have their plant grades and they can mean different things to different plants. So be aware of that before you go straight to the packer. For most of our cow-calf producers, the livestock market is probably going to be your best bet to sell cull cows. You get paid immediately. You have a commission on the cow, but you're pretty well assured that you're going to get paid for that cow. Now, there are some cows that don't need to go to the livestock market. I'm going to talk about those toward the end of this presentation. They don't need to be in the public eye, and we need to make a decision. I really told you there was 2 categories earlier, which was cull and probation. But there's probably a 3rd category that needs to be talked about. It may only be 1 or 2 cows, but that's euthanized. There are some cows that probably don't need to be marketed in any mechanism or any way. They need to stay at home and be euthanized because they were a cow that we made the decision on to cull her too late. Now, we talked a little bit about this. Chris talked about the cow cycles and how over a 10-year, 11-year period, we cycle up and down. Well, we also cycle a lot within a year. The lows from a cow standpoint are generally in the fall, October, November on cull cows. And the highs are generally in the spring, March through maybe even May. This is work out of Oklahoma State that says there's anywhere from a 10 to a 23% change in value from fall to spring in cow prices. That's a pretty significant swing. A lot of times that's 20 cents a pound on cows. And even if the cows don't gain a lot of weight in the fall to spring time window, we can make money a lot of times just in the fact that they gain value because there's fewer of them and more buyers looking for them in the spring time period. You need to keep in mind, if you're looking at moving cows from a fall culling to a spring culling, that has tax implications, moving income to next year if you hold those cows over. And again, I think a second calving season for a lot of you that are large enough to have a group that you'd call on probation, put those probation cows with a Charolais bull, give her an earmark, give her a brand, and the rest of her life, she gets that Charolais bull or whatever breed you want to put on her. She just doesn't have a chance anymore to calve. And in fact, best case scenario, if you're up here in the northern part of the state where we calve a lot of cows in the spring, You get a cow up and you palpate her in the fall and she's open, turn her with a bull immediately and put her in your fall calving herd. That way she doesn't stay open for a whole year. She only stays open for about 6 months of the year. And that's a much quicker turnaround, and I think is a good management decision for a lot of you that are large enough that have a couple hundred cows, large enough to have a couple of seasons like that. I would only put her with that Charolais bull for 45 or 60 days in order to do that. Dr. Hersham, when he was here, did a neat little demo with us here at the beef teaching unit called Flip This Cow. I want to talk just briefly about the economics of upgrading cull cows. The cow on the top slide there is a cow that we bought out of the sale barn. You know, I'd call her condition score 2.5 maybe. She's pretty thin. She has no appreciable fat at all. She's lost a lot of her muscle mass, but appears healthy. That's that same cow after about 90 days on a byproduct feeding regime with some hay. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about that because we did a little bit of this at the beef teaching unit here in Gainesville. When we brought those cows in, it's really kind of like treating that cow like a used pickup. Before you trade her in, you upgrade her a little bit, you clean her up just a little bit. There can be an improvement in value on that cull cow. And I want to talk about that in relation to seasonality as well. So we did this a couple times. We did it with a set of cows in the summertime where we bought some cows in the summertime that weighed 985. We put them on a ration of hay. And at that time we had a lot of brewer's grains, wet brewer's grains byproduct available to us. They came out weighing about 1,200 pounds. So they gained 244 pounds through the summer. They also had grass. They didn't really eat much hay. It was mostly just grass in the summer and a lot of brewer's grains in them. They gained about 2 body condition scores during that time period. Those cows gained 2.6 pounds a day. A thin, healthy cow is very efficient. And I think Nicolas showed you that data. A cow without a calf on her can gain a lot of weight and condition on just, forage, much less forage with supplement. And so in the summertime, these cows gain 2.6 pounds a day overall, or almost 250 pounds. We did the same thing in the fall where we bought them in the fall and then took them through the winter time on more hay and also with brewers. Those cows again gained almost 2 body condition scores and about 200 pounds in an 84-day time period. A little lower average data gain represented having to use more hay and less grass during the fall time period. When you look at the economics of this and the actual end values on those cattle as they came in, if you look in the summertime, we were buying cows that cost 60 cents a pound. When we sold them in the fall, they were still worth 60 cents a pound. We put on weight and they increased in value considerably during that time period. Our cost to gain was only 46 cents per pound, which is a really low cost to gain. And overall, we made about $37. So our feed cost, even though it was low, these cows ate a considerable amount and it represents, it ate up a fair amount of our profit. Now, when we looked at the same kind of cows, buying them in a low market in the fall at 49 cents, and then selling them at a higher market in the spring at 63 cents, and these are actual numbers, our cost to gain was a little higher in the wintertime with the hay. The feed cost overall, though, was a little lower. That's representative of fewer days on feed overall, but our profit was way better. A big chunk of that profit has not to do with what you fed them, how long you fed them, but rather taking a low valued cow in the fall and moving her to a high valued cow in the springtime. That's really why we made money associated with holding these cows or flipping these cows. Now that's in buying cows. It would be even better if you were doing it on your ranch where you had a history of the cow and you knew there wasn't nothing wrong with her. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. This is some work Jason Sawyer did in New Mexico on looking at cow age and how that affects putting cows in a feedlot situation and feeding them. They looked at average daily gain of these cows and they split them up into cows that are 3 and 4 year olds, 5 and 6 year olds, 7 and 8 year olds, and 9+ year old cows. And one of the things you notice, excuse me, one of the things you notice on these cows is that the young cows versus the old cows perform very differently. Old cows lost a lot of weight and these were cows purchased out of a sale barn. Old cows lost a lot of weight initially when they brought them in for the first 14 days. Anything over 7 years of age lost weight. Even the 5 and 6 year olds lost weight. Then from day 15 to day 28, they turned around. The really young cows, 3 and 4 years old, gained weight, but everybody pretty much gained weight for the next 28 days. And then by the time you look at this over a 54-day time period, these young cows were by far the best in terms of their weight gain. And this isn't unusual. We've observed this on a trial I'm not going to show you here, but there were a lot of cows that we fed here locally that came off a South Florida ranch that gained 4 pounds a day for 54 days. Their gains are very efficient when they start thin and healthy from like a body condition score 3 and end up in a body condition score 4.5 and gain 150, 200, even 250 pounds in a 50-day time window. But what this clearly shows is that young cows are much more responsive than old cows to this feeding strategy. So if you're on a large ranch and you've got some open cows and you've decided I'm not going to keep her, she's been open twice and she's 4 years old or 5 years old or 6 years old, maybe those we go ahead and hang on to and feed. But a cow that's been open twice or open once and's got a bad foot and she's older, maybe she's needs to go to the packer right away. It obviously, this is some work here done at Florida that Dr. Johnson's group did, where they looked at feeding these cull cows for a time period. Some of them went direct to slaughter. That's the first column here. It says 0 days. Some they said fed for 42 days and some for 84 days. The gains were not as good in this particular study. These cows were in better shape coming in initially. These were not thin cows, and that's probably very indicative of their weight gains were poor. But one of the things to notice, one of the reasons I put this in here is whatever gain they made in body weight transitioned to gain in carcass weight. So it was gains in muscle mass and fat as time went by. There was big improvements in dressing percentage by feeding these cows. So if you're going straight to the packer with your cows, the cows will dress a lot better if they have been upgraded, so to speak, just a little bit and fed for even as short as 42 days time period. So there was a big jump from 0 to 42 and from 42 to 84. It was a mild jump. There was an increase in muscle mass of about 1 inch for 42 days and another inch at 84 days. And there was an increase in fat. We went from basically very little to no fat to 0.2 of an inch of fat or a little under to a little under 0.4 inch of fat. And that corresponds quite well with their condition scores, especially out here at the 6. And there was a big change in fat color. 5, a score of fat color 5 is very yellow. Fat color 1 is white, like grain-fed beef. So we improved the fat color score tremendously, and the cull cow packers like that. So one of the things I'd tell you is if you're going to feed cows, you probably ought to go straight to the packer with those cows and have a relationship to the packer to let him know what you're bringing. I'm going to bring you some cows that have been on feed of some type for 54 days. When we do that, those cows change the color of the fat. They improve the muscling. We improve the dressing percent. They get bigger carcasses, all of which are wins for that cull cow packer. Now, I used some old data from ONA to go in and look at this. Could I flip cows or can I feed cows on just hay? What about, the studies I just showed you where we're putting cows basically in a dry lot, or we're giving them a lot of feed, 10, 12, 15, 20 pounds of feed a day. Could I do it with just hay? This was some work at ONA where they ate considerably more hay than what Nicolas showed you earlier. But this is disappearance of hay on an as-fed basis, which probably includes waste, which is a huge factor. Regardless, I had to pay for that hay. So when you look at this hay, those cows were eating 35 pounds a day. They didn't give them any supplement. They only gained a pound a day. And that's about what you'd expect on cows when I'm just looking at just hay. Over the course of 114 days, they gained 114 pounds, which was good. But if you look at modern cost on hay at $35 a roll and the amount these cows were eating and or wasting, it cost $173. So my cost of gain was relatively high on those cows that were just eating hay alone because they didn't gain enough weight. When you added supplement, in this case with 6 pounds of molasses, they gained better, but my cost went up. Still, my cost of gain went down because my gain was higher. When you use hay plus citrus pulp, again, my cost went up, but my cost of gain went down because we had an improvement in the rate of gain. Now, still, when you look at this and you evaluate it, one of the things I would encourage you not to do is say, well, I'm going to keep these cows and I'm going to feed them hay and just a little bit of supplement through the winter. I think there's not really a middle ground. I think you either have grass that you can feed those cows with some supplement and lots of unused grass with supplement. Grass you have no other utility for. You're not going to put your cows on it. You're not going to put heifers on it. You're not going to put your bulls on it. It's grass that's going to go unused and some supplement, or you have cheap supplement and a lot of it, and you put them in a feeding situation like a feedlot. These cows needed to have a gain of about $10 a hundredweight in order to break even because of my hay and feed cost. Now that's with current cow cost and current feed cost. It was profitable in 1988 when this was done, but feed cost was considerably cheaper than what it is today. And I think that's something we've all got to keep in the back of our mind. So if you're going to do this, I think you got to have a cheap forage that you have no other use for. You still need to supplement it. And if you're going to do it on forage, it probably needs to be a longer duration of time, 100, 120 days, somewhere in there. Or if you have a cheap, dependable source of feed, you're close to wet citrus pulp and you can get it delivered really cheap. Brewer's grains from a brewery, really cheap. You can put them on full feed. One of the things I would recommend might be to test weighing these cows, and most of you probably don't have this ability to do it, but weigh those cows at about day 28, and those that aren't doing anything probably need to go straight on to the Packers non-performers. They may have an underlying issue they're probably not going to pick up, and you're going to continue to feed them for the next 50, 60 days, and they're not going to do much more than what they've already done. Most of you probably don't have the ability to do that, but I think from an economic standpoint, it makes sense to not continue to feed a cow that's not performing during that time period. Keep in mind when you feed cows, there are some pitfalls that exist out there to feeding cows. There's disease, underlying issues that are not visible, that you can't see. She could have had toxic plants in her system. Her liver may be damaged, kidneys may be damaged. She may have a heavy parasite load. Probably need to deworm these cows coming in. Some of these cows are really old. They may do well eating out of a feed bunk, but they may not do well in a grazing situation because they don't have any teeth. I have seen death loss in excess of 10% on these really, really thin cows. Some of the really old cows do not flip well. They do not go up in terms of condition. They're headed downhill. Plus their social structure. As you mix groups of cows, they have to reestablish the social structure. A thin, lightweight old cow is not going to rise to the top of the social chain. She's not going to get to the bunk. She's not going to get her fair share of the feed. And in fact, as Nicolas showed you, some of them may not go to the bunk. I think that's a big factor in some of these cows when they lose their social status. They just don't get to eat as often or as frequently as some of the other cows. If you are going to feed cows to flip them, keep the time period short. 45 to 60 days on feed will optimize feed conversion and body weight gain if you're feeding them, like full feeding them. Young cows and thin cows have better weight gain. Your cheapest weight gain occurs fast. It occurs early. from a 2.5 to 4.5 condition score. These open cows, like Nicolas shows you, once you get the calf off of them, they're very efficient, especially if they're thin and healthy. They're very efficient. The old cows have greater death loss issues. Your profitability is highly tied to low market in the fall, selling a high market in the spring. So you're really gambling on that shift in market price tremendously. It's tied to cheap feed, underutilized resources. The one thing I didn't mention, and they've done work here, is consider implanting those cull cows with like a TBA growth promoting implant. They will respond to that. It reduces protein turnover. There's been quite a few studies that shown that to be advantageous on cull cows if you're going to keep them for 60, 75 days. If you want to capitalize on improved carcass traits, sell them direct to the packer. Now, with all that said, keep in mind, I don't know how many of you are watching the markets, but we've had a tremendous uptick in corn in the last month. It's gone off the chart. And along with that, many of our byproduct feeds that we might think about for this have gone up considerably. And they're no longer the bargains that they once were back in the fall. So if you bought in your feed in the fall and you have storage capacity for lots of it, maybe you're in good shape. But if you're buying in the spot market, I don't know that now is the time to flip those cows. You better have a unique, really cheap commodity that's out there. I get this question quite often. When's Central Beef going to open? It's my understanding they're harvesting a couple loads of cows every day. Right now, that might up our demand for Florida cows, and it might improve our demand for more fed cows. I know that when they were running previously, there were a lot of producers that warehouse cows from the fall into the spring, and there was $200 per cow to move them into that market. Keep in mind, this is last week's market report. There is a big difference in the value of these cows. A cow that is lean and body condition score 4.5, but weighs 1,100 pounds, has a lot more value to the packer than a skinny cow that is a body condition score 2.5 or 3. And one of the things you need to keep in your mind as you go through this, I'm going to go through a couple of examples just really fast with you, and then I'm going to finish out with some of these scenarios and some things to think about on culling cows. From an example standpoint, all I did was pull up a cow. Here's a 3-year-old. She's been preg checked in the fall and she's open. She raised a good first calf. She's thin. She weighs 1,000 pounds. She's only worth 57 cents right now. That's $570 back to you. Well, you've got an awful lot invested in her to get her to that point. She may gain 3 pounds a day for 60 days. That's 180 days of weight gain. She'll be a body condition score 4.5. That's 1,180 pounds at the end of that time period. Her value in February would be 75 cents. That's $885. The value of her gain is $1.75 if you fed her. Now, that's still probably not enough, but there's probably some seasonal gain in there, 15 to 20%, that really pushes you over the top. With all that said, the jury on her, in my opinion, is I'm going to keep her. She's a young cow that bred the calf as a 2-year-old. She's getting her skip right now, but she's on probation. She may go into my terminal herd at this point in her life, and she has to stay there for the rest of her life. She didn't make the grade the first time, but she's too young of a cow to me to get rid of. I don't see anything wrong with her. She showed me she can do it. I'm going to keep her. Example 2, that's a 6-year-old cow. She's preg checked in the fall. She's open. She's never missed. She's raised an acceptable calf every year. She's got a good mouth. She's body condition score 4, but no defects whatsoever. I'm going to keep her. But again, she's on probation. She's going to move into my terminal herd because this was her one chance. And she took it as a 6-year-old instead of as a 3-year-old. We got a 13-year-old cow. She's open. She's never missed in her life. She's always raised me a good calf. She's a condition score 3.5 this year, pretty thin in the fall. She's missing 2 teeth, no defects. I think that's a cow that probably needs to be on my call list. If I keep her, she's going to be 15 before she has her next calf. So she probably needs to be culled. She's a cow that maybe could go in as a feeding if I know her history and I could put some feed on her, move her from a fall to a spring. She goes on the cull list, but she doesn't have to go to town today because she's healthy. Example 4 is a 14-year-old cow that's bred. She missed once as a 4-year-old. She's always raised a pretty good calf. She's in okay condition. Right now, I'm going to keep her. She's in 4.5 condition. She's got a good mouth. She's always raised me a good calf. She's only missed once. I got no problem. But records are what tells me that I can keep her. But she's on probation. Okay. She's on probation. So she may move to terminal herd from that standpoint. The last cow I'm going to talk about is a 16-year-old cow. She's preg checked, she's bred, and this is the one that lots of people have a hard time with. And I know I need to probably be wrapping this up, Lauren. She's bred, she's missed once. She's raised a below average calf this year. She's thin, she's got a broke mouth, she's got arthritis. That's a cow that needs to cull, and she probably needs to go to town today. She's not one that's going to make it much longer. So I just wanted to show you a few decisions, but it's a case-by-case basis. Some ranches are not as they don't have time to make it on a case-by-case basis. They don't have records to make it on a case-by-case basis. They implement an across-the-board culling strategy. That's okay. You're probably getting rid of all your bad cows, but you're getting rid of some good cows too. It's going to take good record-keeping system to make this work. That means your cow's identified. I kind of like what we talked about at the Institute last year, the year before, where several of the producers said, we really like her to carry that history on her. Maybe that's a little X mark on her hip. Maybe it's the year she skipped. Maybe it's a crop on her ear. Something like that tells me when she missed. A good culling program is going to make it easier for you from a management standpoint. It will improve your cow herd productivity over time. It will improve your fertility of your cow herd over time, and it will identify the cattle that are going to work on your operation. You may get rid of some good cows, but they're cows that maybe were too good for the amount of feed, the amount of forage, and the resources that you have. Keep in mind from the packer, when you send a cow to the packer, she does not all go into hamburger. They are pulling everything out of these cows today, particularly with the high prices of beef at the marketplace. For Christmas this year, my family had tenderloin, cow tenderloin. It was $25 for the whole tenderloin, and it was really good. They are pulling out a lot of the lean cuts. There's a difference in value. They don't want fat cows. Lean has way more value, but many of these packers, 100% of them are pulling out ribs, loins, tenderloins. Lots of them are pulling out rounds, making beef jerky with them, flanks, chucks, even briskets on some of these cows are being used as whole muscle and not being ground. I'm going to finish out with some defects. This was the cow I showed you earlier. That's a cow that's thin. She's a short haul cow. She's a cow that's likely to be down. She's a cow that will be bruised. She probably needs to go directly to the packer, and she needs to be handled with care. A cow with an abscess like shown up on this cow right here, that's got that big lump, is a big red flag to the inspector. You needed to make sure that cow has cleared her withdrawal time before you send her, if in fact that is what I think it might be back there in that hindquarter, which shouldn't be there to start with. This cow that's got an udder issue, she's lost the teat. She's not going to raise another calf. She's obviously got mastitis there. She needs to go direct to the packer. Here's a cow with a lameness problem. She happens to be black and white. We've got beef cows like this too. That cow, there's no meat from the hock down, but that cow throws up a big red flag to the inspector. Is she hot for an antibiotic? Please be very aware. You need these cows that have a big issue. They need to go directly to the packer. They don't need to probably go through the livestock market where they have a chance of going down, chance of being in the public eye from that standpoint. Same is true on cancer eye as it progresses and advances. Those are cows that need to go directly to the packer. And in fact, they probably, as they get to grade 4 or 5 stage, they need to be euthanized at home. Those cows don't need to go to town. Most of the livestock markets will no longer accept them, nor will the packers, because of the stigma associated with the advanced stages of cancer eye from that standpoint. So my rule of thumb on this, on culling cows, and which ones need to go to the packer, which ones need to go to the livestock market. If you wouldn't want your kids or grandkids to eat it, don't sell it. That's a pretty simple take home on these cows. I realize these are culls. Many of you don't have the option to keep them from a fall to the spring. You're going to use those resources for a set of heifers you're developing. You're going to use the resources on a set of cows that need a little more weight. They've all got a problem. Some have bigger problems than others. When I summarized this up and started to think about it, there are decisions that need to be made on those cows in the fall today. She has no teeth, she needs to go. Feet and leg issues, she needs to go. Eye issues, she needs to go. If there's a disease issue and she's headed downhill, she needs to go. She's really thin, not going to pick up, she needs to go. She's unthrifty. She just doesn't look right, and she needs to go. If she chases you up the fence and out of the pen, that's not going to get better. Okay. Producers like Dusty are too old, too bald-headed, and too slow to outrun those kind of cows anymore. So she needs to move. If she's open a second time, none of the things over here on this side get better next year. Okay. They're all going to get worse. So she needs to be moved today, and the ones with the asterisk probably need to go directly to the packer. On the other side are my probation cows. She's an older cow. She goes on probation. She's open one time, probation. Broke mouth, probation. Other issues, probation. Raised them kind of so-so calf, probation. Had trouble calving. You know, used to be they taught us, well, she had trouble calving, color. I've had a lot of cows that have had trouble calving and go on and never have another problem again. Lots of things can happen relating to calving difficulty that aren't her fault, but she's on probation. Anytime somebody comes by and wants to know if I have cows for sale, yeah, we'll go look at the probation cows. Any of those are for sale, given a price. So you can sell those probation cows when the market goes up. You can sell them when drought forces herd liquidation. That's the first cows to go. Someone wants them worse than you do, sell them. When you need washing machine money, sell them. But they've been identified. Those are cows. In the best case scenario, you've got them already in another location with another breeding program. They're getting mated to a terminal size. They're no longer contributing to your herd from a genetic standpoint. The time I choose to sell them depends heavily on the market and what that market holds. They don't always have to go to slaughter. I mentioned this earlier. Put them in a bull for 60 or 120 days. Sell bred cows in the spring. There are a lot of very functional cows. When you have a wreck and you don't have as good a breed up as you wanted, put them with a bull, sell them in a better market in the spring. Again, there's probably $200 to $250 turn in an open, thinner cow in the fall to a light bred spring cow. And I think that's an option for lots of people. With that said, I'll wrap this up to a close. I hope I've covered some of what you wanted. I think there are lots of options on cull cows that a lot of people overlook. Don't keep them until they're old enough to vote. That's probably the biggest problem that I see in cull cows out there today. Trying to squeeze one more out of her for the last 4 years was probably not the right thing. When you say I'm going to try to squeeze one more out of her, that means one more, not 4 more. Anybody got any questions? Dusty, any chat?
Yeah, there was one, Dr. Thrift. It was, what are your thoughts on feeding distillers grains? Pros, cons, risk? Is it a supplemental feed because it is a supplemental feed that is becoming easier to get and cheap, sometimes even free?
They must be closer to what I'd like to know where they're getting it cheap and free.
A brewery, I'm sure.
Where I'm at, but I have no problem. Distillers is great feed. It's very high in protein, probably way more protein than a cow needs. So I would be blending it with citrus pulp. Nicolas, chime in anytime you want here.
Yeah, first I want to know what they're getting for free, so you maybe get some. I love distillers. I'm assuming it may be dry. The wet has some issues with how long it stays good. Maybe, especially in Florida, I wouldn't say maybe no more than a week, 10 days. But it's a great feed. Everything you say, we use it a lot. We just recently heard that the plant here in Camilla, Georgia, that was supplying most of our dry distillers closed or is not producing anymore, which is going to be a big impact to the Southeast in terms of protein supply. But it may, I know it's coming on railroads from the Midwest at a decent price. I don't know what that is right now, but it's great feed. I don't have, my only concern is watch for sulfur when it's fed free choice. It can be pretty high in sulfur, and I've seen polio issues with that. That would be my biggest concern.
I will say this, that often when I hear of this type of cheap and easy, it's almost always a local brewery. It's almost always wet. And it's not usually a large, what we would consider a large amount. And so I think your thoughts on, you know, how stable it is as a wet product for how long is an important thing to think about. But I also would like to point out that these small local breweries are often doing a number of different brews. So you get a lot of variability, at least what I've seen, a lot of variability in these distillers grains from these smaller local breweries because they're doing so many different things with it. But yeah, I think you're right. It's still an excellent co-product or byproduct feed. But I think that's probably what this person is talking about. Some local breweries is offered to give them a 50-gallon drum or two every couple of weeks of it.
Keep in mind that brewers grains is different than
Right.
distillers grains.
Right.
And distillers is a really good protein source. Brewers grains is good feed too. Generally, it is available wet. We feed a lot of that at the teaching unit. Some of the studies I showed you were with that. You're handling a lot of water, 80%, 85% water. So you better have a good way to handle all of that stuff. There are big differences. Dark beers, we've noticed, the cows don't like to eat it as well. They shy away from it quite a bit. They will eat it. It will stay a week, and they'll eat it beyond a week. They just will tend to waste a little more, shy it a little more. The water contains a considerable amount of nutrients. So if you think I'm just going to dump it on the ground and let them eat it off the ground, a lot of your nutrients are leaching away. But it is good feed if you've got a strong back and a good shovel or a way to handle it. It works well.
Right. And for the person who, it was an anonymous question, so I'm not sure where it came from, but you're right on the distinction there. The distillers is used in ethanol or alcohol side of production, and brewers is more on that. I mean, your harder alcohols, higher proof stuff, and your brewers is from the beer industry. Is that right? That's the distinction.
Yeah. And I see the chat there. Some people have said they have bloating issues with brewers. I've not seen bloating with anything that we get. You know, we're not feeding it free choice. They're getting a certain amount, but it's close to free choice. You know, ours will last, even though it starts to get ripe. A lot of that depends. Our local breweries, when they get it, as soon as they clear out a batch of mash, they want us to come get it. They don't want flies. Right. It will draw a lot of flies, but it'll stay. We've kept it for over a week and fed it, and they'll still eat it really well.
All right. Well, thank you for that presentation, Dr. Thrift. That was, you hit the nail on the head with what we wanted you to do. So thank you so much for that. And thank you, Chris and Dr. DeLarenzo, because y'all are still here. We really appreciate y'all doing your presentations today. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We hope to return to our normal program type next year, fingers crossed, and we're not in a pandemic anymore. So stay tuned for that. We want to thank our sponsors one more time as they're scrolling across the screen. And I want to say a special thank you to Pasco County for hosting me today as I was here for a funeral this morning. And they let me very much good hospitality right here. And so, but I did get locked out of the office for a few minutes. So there was a little panic right in the beginning, but we're good now. So with that, as you exit the webinar, there should be a survey that pops up on your screen. We would really love your feedback on the speakers' presentations. And we also will probably send you another survey in a few weeks, just to see if you're utilizing any of the knowledge gain that you did today. So with that, we thank y'all for joining us, and we hope to see you all soon in real life.